The wind came like a thief, sudden, violent, vindictive. Papers exploded from the briefcase, spinning into the salt air above the cliff. Arya Langford lunged forward, her $1,000 heels skidding on wet stone, but the documents were already dancing toward the rocks below. Everything, the evidence, the company, her entire future, was about to disappear into the ocean. Then a calloused hand shot past her shoulder and snatched a single page mid-flight with the precision of someone who'd spent years catching things that shouldn't fall. If you want to see how a coastal craftsman with a buried past dismantles a corporate empire built on lies, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The ocean didn't care about deadlines. Arya Langford stood at the edge of the Crescent Bay estate, watching the contractors mill around the property like ants navigating a disrupted hill. The wind was picking up, had been all morning, and the sky had that bruised quality that promised a storm by evening. She checked her phone for the 14th time in an hour. Still nothing from her legal team. The silence felt deliberate, calculated. Marcus always knew how to make her wait. Marcus, her husband. The man who'd smiled at her across a charity gala 6 years ago and made her believe in partnerships that extended beyond boardrooms. The same man who was now systematically dismantling everything she'd built, using lawyers and loopholes and a disturbing amount of insider knowledge about Langford Industries' vulnerabilities. Ms. Langford? She turned. The estate manager, a nervous woman named Petra, who'd been apologizing for various inconveniences since Arya arrived 3 days ago, was hovering near the stone path that led down from the main house. The structural consultant is here. For the pavilion. Arya had forgotten about the pavilion. Hell, she'd forgotten about this entire property until her attorney suggested she relocate somewhere Marcus couldn't just show up. The Crescent Bay estate had been her grandmother's, left to Arya in a trust Marcus couldn't touch. It was falling apart, literally. The seaside pavilion that jutted out over the rocks had been condemned 2 months ago, and apparently Arya had signed off on repairs at some point when she was still pretending her marriage was salvageable. Fine, send him up. Petra hesitated. He's actually down at the pavilion already. Started the assessment early. He said something about the tide schedule. Of course he did. Arya rubbed her temples. I'll be down in a minute. She should have been in the city. Should have been in the war room with her board, strategizing, fortifying. Instead, she was hiding on a cliff 3 hours north, waiting for documents that might not come, and dealing with a building inspector who apparently didn't understand the concept of appointments. Her phone buzzed. Finally. But it wasn't her legal team. It was Rebecca, her VP of operations, and the message was 3 words. Call me, now. Arya called. They filed, Rebecca said without preamble. Her voice had that thin, stretched quality of someone delivering news they knew would hurt. Hostile takeover. Marcus went public an hour ago. He's calling for an emergency board vote. The ocean kept moving below, waves hitting rocks with the same rhythm they'd maintained for millennia. Arya's world was collapsing, and the water didn't give a damn. How? Her voice came out steadier than she felt. The shares? He's consolidated support. Pulled in the Hendricks Group. Leveraged the pension fund board. Called in favors from half the angel investors we brought in 3 years ago. Arya, he's got the votes. Unless we can demonstrate financial misconduct or breach of fiduciary duty in the next 72 hours, you're going to lose the company. Financial misconduct, Arya repeated. Her laugh was bitter. He's the one bleeding us dry with shell corporations and consulting fees to his college buddies. We've known that for months. Knowing and proving are different things. You need documentation, hard evidence, the kind that holds up in emergency proceedings. Arya closed her eyes. The offshore accounts, the dummy consulting contracts. I had copies. Everything was in the files Cameron was bringing from the city. Silence on the other end. Then, carefully. Cameron's car went off the road last night. He's fine. Minor injuries. But the briefcase he was carrying is missing. The world tilted. Arya gripped the stone railing harder. Missing. Could have been thrown from the vehicle. Could have been taken. We don't know, but Arya, if those documents are gone, they're not gone. She said it with more confidence than she felt. Cameron made copies. He always makes copies. I hope you're right, because right now Marcus is spinning a narrative about financial mismanagement and emotional instability, and the board is listening. You need ammunition, and you need it before Friday's vote. Friday, 2 days. Arya ended the call and stood there, breathing salt air and fury in equal measure. 6 years. She'd spent 6 years building Langford Industries into something that mattered, something beyond her family name. And Marcus had spent 6 years learning every weakness, every pressure point, every way to tear it down from the inside. The wind gusted harder, colder. Arya turned towards the house, ready to call her attorneys and start the impossible task of reconstructing evidence from memory and fragments. That's when she saw the briefcase. It was sitting on the stone bench near the garden path, partially hidden by overgrown lavender. Brown leather, expensive, monogrammed. Cameron's briefcase. Arya's heart kicked against her ribs. She moved fast, heels clicking on stone, and grabbed it. The latches were damaged, bent inward like something heavy had hit them. She forced them open. Papers. Folders. USB drives tucked into the side pocket. Everything was there. The account statements, the contractor invoices, the email chains that proved Marcus had been siphoning money for 18 months. Relief hit her so hard she almost sat down on the wet bench. Then the wind came. It wasn't a gust. It was a wall of air that seemed to come from every direction at once, howling up from the cliff face with enough force to rip the briefcase from her hands. Papers exploded outward, white sheets spinning, tumbling, scattering like startled birds. No! Arya lunged. Her fingers closed on nothing. The documents were airborne, some catching in the lavender, others sailing toward the cliff edge. She ran, skidding on slick stone, grabbing at pages that danced just out of reach. Her heel caught on uneven pavement. She stumbled, caught herself, kept moving. The most important page, the one with the offshore account numbers and Marcus's signature, was tumbling end over end toward the rocks below. She wasn't going to reach it. Physics and panic made that clear. The page was already past the railing, already tipping into the void. Arya stretched anyway, her fingers grasping at air, her balance shifting dangerously forward. A hand shot past her shoulder. It was fast, precise. The kind of movement that looked casual because it was so efficient. Calloused fingers closed on the corner of the page mid-flight, plucking it from the wind with the timing of someone who'd spent years calculating trajectories and compensating for variables. Arya spun. The man standing behind her wasn't particularly tall, maybe 5'11", with the kind of build that came from actual labor, rather than gym memberships. Brown hair that needed a cut, sun-weathered skin, and pale green eyes that were currently focused on the page in his hand rather than on her. "This looks important," he said. His voice was rough around the edges, North Atlantic coast accent softened by years somewhere else. "You might want to hold on to it." He handed her the document. Arya took it with shaking hands. How did you... Wind patterns off cliff faces are predictable once you know what to look for." He glanced past her at the other papers scattered across the garden. "You've got about 30 seconds before the next gust hits. Might want to secure the rest." He moved past her without waiting for a response, crouching to gather pages that had caught in the lavender. His movements were efficient, methodical. He wasn't reading the documents, but he was organizing them. Financial statements in one stack, correspondence in another, contracts separated from receipts. Arya stood there, still holding the offshore account page, and watched this stranger impose order on her chaos. "Who are you?" "Ethan Cole." He didn't look up. "The structural consultant for the pavilion." "Right." The building inspector who didn't understand appointments, except he'd just saved evidence that might save her company, and he was currently handling documents worth millions in litigation value with the casual competence of someone who dealt with high-stakes information regularly. Arya knelt beside him and started gathering papers. Her hands were still shaking. "Thank you. I mean it. That page, it's irreplaceable." "Everything's replaceable." Ethan's tone was flat, matter-of-fact. "Just a question of cost and time." He glanced at her, brief and assessing. "Usually not worth it." They worked in silence, racing the wind. Arya's knees were getting soaked from the wet stone. Her carefully pressed suit was probably ruined. She didn't care. The documents were what mattered. evidence, ammunition, proof that Marcus had been lying for 18 months. The briefcase latches are damaged, Ethan said. He'd moved on to collecting pages that had blown into the hedgerow. Looks like impact damage. These fell from something moving. A car accident. Arya shoved a stack of contracts into the briefcase. Last night, my associate was bringing these to me. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then, the accident on Highway 47? The one where the guardrail failed? You heard about it? Small coastal community. Everyone hears about everything. He handed her another stack of papers, neatly organized. Your associate was lucky. That section of guardrail's been on the repair list for 8 months. Funding kept getting delayed. There was something in his tone. Not quite accusation, but not neutral either. Arya looked up sharply. What are you implying? Nothing. Ethan stood, brushing dirt from his jeans, just observing that sometimes infrastructure failures have convenient timing. Arya's blood went cold. You think someone sabotaged the guardrail? I think I'm a structural consultant, not an investigator. He met her eyes directly. But I've seen enough construction sites to know the difference between weather damage and tool marks. The wind gusted again. Arya grabbed the briefcase and held it closed with both hands. If someone tampered with that guardrail, then they committed attempted murder and evidence tampering. Ethan's voice was calm, clinical. Which means you're in more trouble than a hostile takeover. You know that, right? She did. She'd known it the moment Rebecca said the briefcase was missing. Marcus wasn't just trying to take her company. He was willing to hurt people to do it. The realization sat in her stomach like swallowed glass. I need to get these inside, she said. Somewhere secure. Ethan nodded. You've got a safe in the house? How do you... Arya stopped herself. Yes, in the study. Use it. And if you're smart, you'll make digital copies before the day's out. He looked past her, down toward the pavilion. I need to finish the assessment before the tide comes in. Petra has my report timeline if you need it. He was already walking away. Arya watched him go, this stranger who'd just saved her evidence and casually suggested her husband might be trying to kill her. The weirdest part was how calm he'd been about it, like attempted murder was just another data point to factor in. Mr. Cole. He paused, turned halfway. Thank you, Arya said. Really, I owe you. Something flickered across his face, not quite a smile, more like acknowledgement of a debt that would never be called. You don't owe me anything, Ms. Langford. Just maybe check your security system before you go to sleep tonight. Then he was gone, disappearing down the stone path toward the condemned pavilion and the rocks below. Arya spent the next 3 hours in the study, photographing every document, uploading everything to encrypted cloud storage, and emailing copies to Rebecca and her legal team with instructions that felt increasingly paranoid and entirely justified. The offshore accounts were there. The shell corporations were documented. The dummy consulting contracts that funneled Langford Industries' money to Marcus's personal holdings were laid out in black and white. It was enough. It had to be enough. Her phone rang. Marcus. She stared at his name on the screen, Marcus Langford, because she'd never bothered changing it back to his original surname after the marriage, and felt the familiar cocktail of anger and exhaustion. She answered. Arya. His voice was smooth, measured, the voice that had once made her feel safe. I heard you had some trouble on the estate, papers in the wind, dramatic. Her hand tightened on the phone. How did you... Small coastal community. Everyone hears about everything. He was quoting Ethan word for word, which meant someone at the estate had already reported back to him. Petra, probably. Or one of the contractors. I wanted to check in. Make sure you're handling the stress okay. I'm fine. Are you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're falling apart. Missing board meetings, hiding on your grandmother's property, chasing papers in a storm. He paused, let that sink in. The board's worried, Arya. They're starting to wonder if you're capable of leading the company through this transitional period. Transitional period, like he hadn't engineered the entire crisis. I'll be at the vote on Friday, Arya said. Her voice was ice. And I'll be bringing documentation of every illegal financial transaction you've made in the last 18 months. So maybe focus less on my mental state and more on hiring a good criminal attorney. Silence. Then Marcus laughed. Actually, laughed. Arya, sweetheart, if you had that kind of documentation, you'd have used it months ago. This is desperation, and we both know it. Try me. I will. His tone shifted, went colder. And when you show up empty-handed on Friday, when the board votes you out and I take control of the company your grandmother built, I want you to remember something. You did this. You made me the enemy. I offered you a partnership, a real one, and you chose pride instead. You stole from the company? I invested in our future. There's a difference, but you never could see the long game. Another pause. Cameron's recovering, by the way, in case you were wondering. Broken collarbone, some bruising, could have been much worse. Those coastal roads are dangerous this time of year. The threat was barely veiled. Arya's hand shook. If you touch anyone else, I don't need to touch anyone, Arya. You're self-destructing just fine on your own. He hung up. Arya set the phone down carefully, precisely, because throwing it would feel good but solve nothing. Marcus was right about one thing. She was running out of time. 2 days until the board vote. 2 days to turn evidence into strategy, documentation into victory. She looked out the study window, down toward the pavilion. From this angle, she could just barely see it, the white structure perched on the cliff's edge like a bird about to take flight. And she could see Ethan Cole, a small figure moving around the building's perimeter, crouching, examining, photographing. A structural consultant who caught papers mid-flight and understood wind patterns off cliff faces, who casually mentioned tool marks on damaged guardrails and suggested checking security systems, who organized financial documents with the efficiency of someone who'd done it before. Arya made a decision. The path down to the pavilion was steeper than it looked. Arya swapped her heels for boots she found in the mudroom, her grandmother's probably, still caked with garden soil, and made her way down carefully. The wind was constant here, pushing at her back like an insistent hand. Ethan was standing at the pavilion's entrance, examining the door frame with a tool she didn't recognize. He glanced up as she approached, expression neutral. "Ms. Langford, thought you'd be busy with those documents." "I am. I will be." Arya stopped a few feet away. Up close, she could see the details she'd missed before. The scars on his hands, the kind that came from tools and mistakes and learning the hard way. The precise way he held the measuring device, like it was an extension of his hand. "I wanted to ask you something." "About the pavilion?" "About you." She crossed her arms. "You're not just a building inspector." Ethan didn't look up from the door frame. "I'm a structural consultant. It's on my card." Structural consultants don't usually have opinions about evidence tampering, or suggest security protocols, or catch windblown documents with the reflexes of someone who's trained for tactical situations. That got his attention. He straightened, meeting her eyes directly. "You've had a stressful day, Ms. Langford. Might be reading into things that aren't there." "Am I?" Arya stepped closer. "Because here's what I know. You showed up at exactly the right moment. You assessed the situation, the documents, the wind patterns, the damaged briefcase, in seconds. You organized evidence like someone who understands chain of custody. And when you mentioned that guardrail, you weren't speculating. You'd already looked into it." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. The wind filled the silence, howling around the pavilion's supports. "I did my military service," he said finally. "Marines, structural engineering unit. We assessed buildings, bridges, infrastructure in contested zones. You learn to see things, patterns, vulnerabilities, when something's been compromised deliberately." He set the measuring tool down. "That answer your question?" "Partially." Arya studied him. "What are you doing working as a coastal building inspector?" "Consultant," he corrected. "And I'm doing it because it's quiet, because my daughter likes the ocean, because I'm done with complicated situations that get people killed." He picked up a clipboard, made a note. "Your pavilion needs complete foundation reinforcement, by the way. The support columns are compromised. Storm surge has eroded the underlying rock structure. Give it another winter, and this whole thing ends up in the ocean." He was deflecting. Arya let him, filed it away. "How long to fix it?" 6 months. Maybe 8 if we hit bad weather. Ethan flipped through pages on his clipboard. But that's not why you came down here. No. Arya took a breath. I came down here because I'm 2 days away from losing everything I've built, and the evidence I need to stop it almost blew into the ocean this morning. I came down here because my husband is trying to steal my company using infrastructure that someone, maybe him, compromised. And I came down here because you're the first person in 6 months who's helped me without wanting something in return. Ethan looked at her. Really looked. The kind of assessment she imagined he'd used in those contested zones he'd mentioned. What are you asking me, Ms. Langford? I'm asking if you meant what you said. About the guardrail. About tool marks. I did. Then I'm asking if you'd be willing to look at something else. Something structural, but not a building. Ethan's eyes narrowed. You want me to assess the physical evidence from your associate's accident. I want to know if someone tried to kill him to destroy my documentation. I want to know if my husband is escalating from corporate espionage to attempted murder. And if he is, Arya's voice cracked just slightly. She steadied it. If he is, I need to know what I'm dealing with, what kind of danger my people are in. The waves crashed below them. Ethan set the clipboard down, leaned against the pavilion railing, carefully, like he knew exactly how much weight it could hold. This isn't my world anymore, he said quietly. I walked away from complicated for a reason. I know, and I wouldn't ask if I had another option, but I don't know who else to trust right now. Arya moved to stand beside him, looking out at the ocean. You see things other people miss. You understand systems, how they're supposed to work and how they fail, and you've already helped me more than you had to. Ethan was silent. Arya could see him thinking, weighing, calculating risks the way he probably calculated load-bearing capacities and stress tolerances. I have a daughter, he said finally. She's 7, Sophia. She's the reason I do quiet work in coastal towns instead of consulting for defense contractors. She's the reason I left the complicated situations behind. I understand. I'm not finished. Ethan's voice was firm, but not unkind. She's the reason. And if I start looking into your husband's structural sabotage, if I verify that someone deliberately compromised that guardrail, I'm pulling her into something dangerous. I'm making enemies of people who've already shown they're willing to hurt others to get what they want. Arya felt her hope deflate. I understand. I'm sorry I asked. I didn't say no. Ethan turned to look at her. I said it's complicated. There's a difference. Then what? I'll look at the guardrail tomorrow. No promises, no commitments beyond that. I'll assess the damage, document what I find, and tell you whether it was weather or sabotage. He paused. But if it's sabotage, if your husband is willing to kill for this company, then you need to understand something. This isn't just about business anymore. It's about survival. And survival doesn't play by boardroom rules. Arya met his eyes. I know. Do you? Ethan's gaze was steady, unflinching. Because from where I'm standing, you still think this ends with a board vote and legal documentation. But if Marcus is desperate enough to take out guardrails, he's desperate enough to try again. Maybe not your associate next time, maybe you. The words landed like physical blows. Arya had known it, somewhere deep and animal, but hearing it said out loud made it real. What do I do? Her voice came out smaller than she intended. You get smart. You stop assuming this is a fair fight. Ethan picked up his clipboard again. And you start thinking like someone who has everything to lose. Because you do. He walked away then, back toward the pavilion's far side where the foundation met the cliff face. Arya stood there, boots soaked from sea spray, and watched him work. Methodical, precise. Someone who understood that everything eventually failed if you pushed it hard enough, and the trick was knowing where the breaking points were before they broke you. Her phone buzzed. Rebecca again. Board meeting moved up. Thursday morning, 9 a.m. Marcus is pushing for an emergency vote. You need to be ready. Thursday. Tomorrow. Arya's hands clenched around the phone. She looked back at Ethan, crouched beside a support column with his measuring tools and his quiet competence. A man who'd walked away from complicated situations and might be about to walk straight back into one. Mr. Cole? He glanced up. When you assess that guardrail tomorrow, bring whatever documentation you need to stand up in court. Because if Marcus did this, I'm not just taking back my company. I'm making sure he never has the chance to hurt anyone else." Ethan studied her for a moment. Then he nodded, once. "Thursday morning, Highway 47, mile marker 38. I'll meet you there at dawn." "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet, Ms. Langford. You might not like what we find." He went back to work. Arya climbed the path back to the house, her grandmother's boots slipping on wet stone, her mind already racing through scenarios and strategies, and the dawning realization that she'd just hired a stranger to help her prove her husband was trying to kill her. The ocean kept moving below, waves hitting rocks, constant and indifferent. 2 days until the board vote, 1 day until she'd know whether Marcus was a thief or a murderer. And somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled across the water like a warning she was already too late to heed. Dawn came cold and gray, the kind of morning that made promises feel fragile. Arya had barely slept. She'd spent most of the night in her grandmother's study, cross-referencing financial documents with timeline notes, building a case that would either save her company or prove she was paranoid enough to need the professional help Marcus kept suggesting she seek. At 5:30, she gave up pretending rest was possible and made coffee that tasted like burnt ambition. By 6, she was in the Range Rover, driving south on Highway 47 with the heater blasting and her hands too tight on the wheel. Mile marker 38 appeared through the pre-dawn gloom like an accusation. Arya pulled onto the shoulder, what was left of it, and killed the engine. The damaged guardrail was maybe 30 feet ahead, a twisted metal mouth gaping open toward the rocks below. Someone had put up orange cones and caution tape, the kind of half-hearted safety theater that happened after the damage was already done. Ethan's truck was already there. He was standing at the edge of the broken section, wearing a weathered jacket and holding what looked like a tactical flashlight. When Arya approached, he didn't turn around. "You're early," he said. "Couldn't sleep." Arya stopped beside him, looked down at the drop. 50 feet, maybe more. Rocks and surf, and the permanent kind of ending. "Cameron's lucky." Luck had nothing to do with it. He hit the one section of rail that was still partially intact. 3 feet to the left, and we wouldn't be having this conversation. Ethan crouched, ran his light along the base of the damaged post. "Come here. I want to show you something." Arya knelt beside him. The metal post was sheared off at the base, the break clean and angular. Too clean. "See this?" Ethan pointed at the edge of the metal. "That's not impact damage. Impact bends, tears, leaves compression marks. This was cut, most of the way through, probably a few days before the accident, left just enough intact to look normal from a distance." Her stomach went cold. "You're sure?" 98%. I'd need metallurgical analysis to be completely certain, but I've seen enough sabotaged infrastructure to recognize the pattern. He shifted his light to another section. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. They calculated the exact stress point, weakened it just enough that normal traffic wouldn't trigger a failure, but a swerve or heavy braking would. How do you calculate something like that? Engineering degree and a fundamental lack of conscience. Ethan stood, brushed dirt from his knees. "The question is whether you want me to document this officially. Because once I file a report saying this was deliberate, it becomes a criminal investigation. Police, forensics, media attention, everything you're dealing with gets exponentially more complicated." Arya stared at the broken guardrail. Cameron could have died here. Probably should have died here. The only reason he hadn't was dumb chance and the laws of physics deciding to be generous for once. "Do it," she said. "Document everything. File the report. I'm not letting Marcus get away with attempted murder just because it makes my corporate fight messier." Ethan nodded once, pulled out his phone and started taking photographs. His movements were systematic, professional. Wide shots, close-ups, angle documentation. He measured distances, took notes on a small pad, collected something from the base of the post, and sealed it in a plastic bag. "Metal shavings," he said, showing her the bag. "From the cutting tool. Might help identify what was used, maybe even trace it back to a purchase if we're lucky." "We won't be," Arya said flatly. "Marcus is too smart for that. If he hired someone to do this, there won't be a credit card trail or a convenient witness." "Probably not." Ethan pocketed the evidence bag. "But people make mistakes when they're desperate. And sabotaging infrastructure is desperate." They worked in silence for another 20 minutes while the sun struggled up through cloud cover that looked like it had no intention of clearing. Arya watched Ethan move around the site with the focused intensity of someone who'd done this in war zones and disaster areas, places where getting the details wrong meant body counts. "You said you did this in the Marines," she said finally. "Assessed structural damage. Among other things." "What other things?" Ethan straightened, looked at her directly. "Things that aren't relevant to your guardrail problem. Humor me." He was quiet for a moment, weighing something internal. Then, demolitions assessment. We'd go into buildings that had been bombed or undermined, figure out if they were safe to enter, identify what kind of explosives were used, how they were placed, what the tactical objective was. Sometimes we'd find survivors. Sometimes we'd just find mistakes. That's a hell of a resume for a coastal building inspector. It's why I'm good at it. Ethan packed his measuring tools back into a weathered canvas bag. And it's why I don't do that work anymore. You spend enough time looking at what happens when structures fail, you start seeing the world as a series of potential collapses. It's not a healthy way to live. But you're still doing it, Arya pointed out. Right now. Looking at this guardrail and seeing all the ways Marcus tried to make someone die. Yeah. His expression was unreadable. Guess some habits are harder to break than others. A car passed on the highway, slowing slightly to navigate around the orange cones. Ethan watched it until it disappeared around the curve, then turned back to Arya. "I'll have the preliminary report ready by tonight. Full documentation will take a few days, but I can give you enough for your board meeting." "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. Once this report exists, it becomes evidence, which means you become a witness, which means your husband's legal team is going to come after you with everything they have to discredit your testimony." Arya almost laughed. "They're already trying to paint me as emotionally unstable and professionally incompetent. Adding conspiracy theorists to the list isn't much of a stretch." It is when the conspiracy turns out to be real. Ethan shouldered his bag. You need to be prepared for what happens when this stops being corporate drama and starts being criminal prosecution. Because if Marcus goes down for attempted murder, he's taking everyone he can with him, including you, if he finds a way. The words settled over her like the coastal fog, cold and penetrating. Arya pulled her jacket tighter. "I've been preparing for him to destroy me since he filed the takeover papers. This is just a different kind of destruction." "No," Ethan said quietly. "This is worse. Property and reputation you can rebuild. A criminal record, a compromised legal position, witness intimidation that turns physical, that kind of damage is permanent. Then what am I supposed to do? Let him win?" "I'm saying you need to be smart about how you fight. Strategic, not just determined." He started walking back toward his truck. "And you need to consider the possibility that winning might mean something different than taking back your company." Arya followed him, anger flaring hot in her chest. "So I should just give up? Hand over everything I've built because my husband is dangerous?" "I'm saying you should think about whether a company is worth dying for." Ethan reached his truck, tossed the canvas bag into the bed. "Because from what I saw at that estate yesterday, you're already running on fumes and fury. Push too hard, and you'll break before Marcus does." "You don't know me." "No. But I know what someone looks like when they're about to make decisions that get them killed." He turned to face her, and his eyes were harder than she'd seen them before. "I've seen it enough times to recognize the pattern. And right now, you're following it step by step." The accusation hit deeper than it should have. Arya wanted to argue, to throw his assessment back in his face with all the righteous anger of someone who knew she was right. But standing there on the side of Highway 47, looking at the guardrail that should have killed Cameron and might still kill her if Marcus decided to try again, she couldn't quite manage it. "I don't know how to fight any other way," she said finally. The admission felt like defeat. "I've spent 6 years building Langford Industries into something that matters. If I walk away now, Marcus doesn't just win. He gets to rewrite everything I did into a story where I was the problem all along. Every deal I closed, every partnership I negotiated, every innovation we developed, it all becomes his legacy instead of mine." "Legacy doesn't mean much if you're not alive to defend it. It means everything if it's all you have left." Arya's voice cracked. She steadied it, forced the emotion back down where it belonged. You asked me yesterday if I understood this was about survival. I do. But survival without purpose is just existence, and I'm not interested in that. Ethan studied her for a long moment. Then he reached into his truck and pulled out a thermos. Coffee? The subject change was so abrupt it took her a second to process. What? Coffee. You look like you need it, and I made too much this morning. Sure. Thank you. He poured coffee into the thermos cap and handed it to her. It was better than what she'd made at 5:30, which probably said something about her current state of mind. They stood there in the growing daylight, drinking coffee and watching early morning traffic navigate around the damaged guardrail while the ocean crashed somewhere below them. I left the Marines because of a building collapse in Yemen, Ethan said abruptly. We'd been called in to assess a government complex that had taken rocket damage. I cleared 3 floors, said they were structurally sound for occupation. 2 days later, the 4th floor pancaked during a meeting. Killed 11 people, including a translator I'd worked with for 8 months. Arya looked at him. Ethan was staring at the road, his expression carefully neutral. Investigation said it wasn't my fault, he continued. The collapse was triggered by secondary explosives I couldn't have detected without equipment we didn't have access to. But 11 people died because I said a building was safe, and it wasn't. So I finished my service and got out. Came back to the States, found quiet work, tried to become the kind of person who doesn't make mistakes that kill people. Did it work? Most days. He took the thermos cap back, refilled it. But then someone like you shows up, asking me to assess sabotaged infrastructure while their husband tries to commit murder, and I remember why I left complicated situations in the first place. I'm sorry, Arya said. I shouldn't have dragged you into this. You didn't drag me anywhere. I chose to catch that paper yesterday instead of letting it blow away. I chose to look at this guardrail this morning instead of telling you to hire someone else. Ethan's mouth twisted into something that might have been a smile in different circumstances. We all make our choices, Ms. Langford. The trick is living with them afterward. A semi roared past, close enough that the wind draft rocked them both. Arya waited until the sound faded before speaking again. Why are you telling me this? Because you need to understand what you're asking people to risk when you pull them into your fight with Marcus. Cameron ended up in the hospital. I'm about to file a report that makes me a witness in a criminal investigation. Everyone who helps you becomes a target. He met her eyes. That's the cost of your survival fight, and you need to be okay with that cost, or you need to walk away now before more people get hurt. The words were brutal in their honesty. Arya wanted to argue, to say she'd never asked Cameron to risk his life, never asked Ethan to involve himself. But she had. Maybe not explicitly, but she'd created the situation that put them in danger just by fighting back against Marcus instead of rolling over and accepting defeat. I can't walk away, she said quietly. Not from this. Not from everything I've built. Then you better get ruthless real fast. Ethan poured the rest of the coffee onto the ground, screwed the cap back on the thermos. Because Marcus already is, and moral high ground doesn't mean much if you're dead. He climbed into his truck. Arya stepped back, expecting him to drive away, but he rolled down the window instead. Your board meeting is tomorrow morning? 9 a.m., downtown office. I'll have the preliminary report to you by 8. It won't be the full forensic analysis, but it'll be enough to establish probable cause for investigation. He paused. And Ms. Langford, when you walk into that boardroom tomorrow, don't lead with the sabotage evidence. Start with the financial documents. Make your case for Marcus's embezzlement first. Only bring up the guardrail if he tries to discredit your evidence. Why? Because if you open with, my husband tried to kill my associate, you sound desperate. But if you prove he's been stealing for 18 months and then casually mention that, oh, by the way, he might also be attempting murder, that's when you sound dangerous. And dangerous is what you need to be. He drove off before Arya could respond, leaving her standing beside the broken guardrail with empty coffee and the growing realization that Ethan Cole understood power dynamics better than most people who'd spent their entire careers in corporate warfare. Her phone buzzed. Rebecca. News leaked about board meeting. Media is calling it a hostile takeover showdown. This is going to be a circus. Of course it was. Marcus had probably leaked it himself, building narrative pressure, forcing Arya to defend herself publicly before she'd even entered the boardroom. It was exactly the kind of tactical manipulation he excelled at. She typed back, "Let them call it whatever they want. I have documentation." Rebecca's response came fast. "Documentation might not be enough. Hendricks Group is pushing hard for Marcus. They're calling your evidence circumstantial." Arya stared at her phone. The Hendricks Group controlled 15% of Langford Industries' voting shares. If they were actively supporting Marcus, her margin for error had just evaporated. Another message from Rebecca. "You need a win before tomorrow, something that shifts momentum. Otherwise, we're going into that meeting already losing." A win. Arya looked back at the guardrail, at the evidence of attempted murder, at the clear line between corporate espionage and genuine evil. If she could prove Marcus had tried to kill Cameron, the Hendricks Group would abandon him faster than rats leaving a sinking ship. But Ethan was right. Leading with murder accusations made her look desperate, not dangerous. She needed something else, something that hit Marcus where he lived, that demonstrated she wasn't just defending, but attacking. Arya pulled up her email, found the offshore account information Cameron had compiled, and started scrolling. The money trail was there. Shell corporations, dummy consulting fees, wire transfers that conveniently happened during Marcus's business trips to the Cayman Islands. But it was complex, technical, the kind of evidence that required forensic accountants and patient juries to understand fully, unless she made it simple. Her phone rang. Unknown number. Arya almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Ms. Langford?" The voice was young, male, nervous. "This is David Park. I'm a junior analyst at Hendricks Group." Arya's pulse kicked up. "How did you get this number?" It doesn't matter. I don't have much time. I'm calling because I think you should know that Marcus Langford met with our CEO last night. Private meeting, not on anyone's calendar. And this morning, Hendricks Group announced we're voting to support the takeover." "I already knew that." "Yeah, but you don't know why." David's voice dropped lower, like he was afraid of being overheard. "Marcus showed us projections, revenue forecasts, market expansion plans, all of it tied to something called the Ether Dome project. He's claiming it's revolutionary infrastructure design that's going to transform coastal development. Said he's been developing it for 3 years with a team of engineers, and that you've been blocking implementation because you don't understand the technical aspects." Arya's blood went cold. "The Ether Dome. You've heard of it?" She had. Vaguely. Marcus had mentioned it maybe 18 months ago, talking about some innovative building design that could withstand hurricane-force winds and storm surge. She'd been skeptical. Marcus was a finance guy, not an engineer, but he'd shown her some preliminary sketches and calculations that looked legitimate enough. She'd filed it under interesting but unproven and moved on to more pressing concerns. "What exactly did Marcus tell Hendricks Group?" Arya asked carefully. "That the Ether Dome design is worth potentially billions in licensing fees. That every coastal city dealing with climate change and infrastructure vulnerability is going to want this technology, and that you're standing in the way of development because you want to maintain control of the company rather than pursue innovation." "That's insane. I've never blocked any legitimate engineering project." "Maybe not, but Marcus has documentation, design patents, engineering calculations, prototype testing results. It all looks really professional. And our CEO ate it up. That's why we're voting for the takeover. We think Marcus is the one with vision, and you're the one holding the company back." Arya's mind was racing. The Ether Dome. Revolutionary design, engineering calculations that looked professional. And Marcus, who couldn't engineer his way out of a paper bag, somehow presenting himself as the technical genius behind it all. "David, I need you to send me everything Marcus showed Hendricks Group. Every document, every projection, every technical specification." "I can't. I'd lose my job." "And if you don't, Marcus Langford is going to steal a company using fraudulent technical claims and fake engineering credentials. Your choice." Silence on the other end. Then, "I'll send what I can, but Ms. Langford, be careful. Marcus has a lot of people convinced he's the victim here. If you try to call him out without ironclad proof, it's going to backfire hard." "Send me the documents. I'll handle the rest." David hung up. Arya stood there, phone pressed to her ear, long after the line went dead, and felt pieces clicking into place. Marcus wasn't just embezzling money. He was stealing intellectual property, claiming someone else's engineering work as his own, building his entire takeover case on technical innovation he didn't create. The question was, whose innovation was he stealing? Arya got back in the Range Rover and drove north, pushing speed limits and ignoring the way her hands shook on the wheel. By the time she reached the Crescent Bay estate, the sun was fully up and Petra was waiting at the main house with a concerned expression and a message that Mr. Cole needed to speak with her urgently. She found Ethan at the pavilion again, but this time he wasn't examining the structure. He was standing at the railing, looking out at the ocean, and something about his posture made Arya slow down as she approached. "Ethan?" He turned. His expression was carefully controlled, but she could see tension in his shoulders, a tightness around his eyes that hadn't been there this morning. "I need to ask you something," he said, "and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Okay." "The Ether Dome project. What do you know about it?" The question hit like a physical blow. Arya felt the breath leave her lungs. What do you know about it?" Ethan's voice was harder now, insistent. "Because I just got a call from an old engineering contact asking if I knew Marcus Langford was presenting Ether Dome designs to investment groups. And I need to know whether you're part of that theft or just married to the thief." I didn't. Arya stopped, forced herself to slow down. "I barely know anything about the Ether Dome. Marcus mentioned it maybe a year and a half ago, said he was working with engineers on innovative coastal infrastructure. I saw some sketches, some calculations. That's it." "Did you see the name on those calculations?" "No, Marcus said it was proprietary work product, that the engineers wanted to remain anonymous until the patent was filed." Ethan laughed, bitter and sharp. "Of course he did. Because if you'd seen the name, you would have realized he was presenting my work as his own." The world tilted. Arya grabbed the railing for balance. "Your work, my design, my calculations, my 3 years of research and testing." Ethan's voice was tight with controlled fury. "The Ether Dome was my master's thesis project. Revolutionary structural design that uses adaptive tension systems to distribute storm force across multiple load points instead of concentrating stress on fixed supports. I proved it could withstand Category 5 hurricane winds and 20-foot storm surges. I had prototypes built, lab testing done, everything documented." "When?" 4 years ago. I finished the project right before my wife got sick." His jaw clenched. "We needed money for treatment, experimental therapy that insurance wouldn't cover. I was desperate, and Marcus was offering a solution." Arya felt sick. "What kind of solution?" "A licensing agreement. Marcus said he had connections in the construction industry, that he could get the Ether Dome design in front of major developers. All I had to do was sign over temporary rights so he could pitch it to investors. He promised royalties, profit sharing, full credit for the original engineering work." "Let me guess," Arya said quietly. "You never saw a cent." "I saw enough to pay for my wife's first round of treatment. Then Marcus disappeared. Stopped returning calls, stopped responding to emails. When I finally tracked him down, he claimed the design wasn't marketable, that investors had passed, that the licensing agreement was void because I'd failed to meet development milestones." "What milestones?" Ones he'd written into the contract in language I didn't read carefully because I was too busy trying to keep my wife alive. Ethan's hands were gripping the railing hard enough that his knuckles had gone white. "By the time I realized what he'd done, Sarah was in hospice. I had a 7-year-old daughter to take care of and no money left to fight a legal battle I probably would have lost anyway. So I let it go. Figured the Ether Dome was dead, buried with everything else I'd lost that year." Arya felt like she was going to be sick. "Ethan, I swear I didn't know. If I'd known Marcus had stolen your work, but you married him anyway." Ethan turned to look at her directly. "You built a company with him. You trusted him enough to make him your partner. And now you're asking me to help you take him down, not because of what he did to me, but because of what he's doing to you." "That's not—" "It is." His voice cut through her protest. "And I'm not saying that to be cruel. I'm saying it because you need to understand what kind of man you're fighting. Marcus doesn't just steal money or sabotage guardrails. He exploits people when they're vulnerable. He finds the moment when they're desperate and afraid, and he turns that desperation into leverage." "I know what he is," Arya said. "I've been living with him for 6 years. then you know he's going to use the ether dome to destroy you tomorrow. He's going to walk into that boardroom with my designs and present himself as an innovative genius while painting you as an obstacle to progress. And unless you have a way to prove he stole the intellectual property, he's going to win." Arya's mind was racing. David Park was sending her the documents Marcus had shown Hendricks Group. If those documents contained Ethan's original design work, if there was any way to prove the ether dome was stolen intellectual property. "I need your original research," she said. "Everything you filed for your master's thesis, design plans, calculations, testing data, anything that proves you created the ether dome before Marcus claimed it." "Why?" "Because I'm going to walk into that board meeting tomorrow and destroy him with it." Arya met Ethan's eyes. "You said I need to get ruthless. Fine. I'm getting ruthless. Marcus stole your work, stole my company, tried to kill Cameron, and has been exploiting everyone around him for years. I'm done defending. It's time to attack." Ethan studied her for a long moment. Then, "My thesis research is in storage. I'd need to dig it out, scan everything, compile it into something presentable." "How long?" 6 hours, maybe 8. "Do it." Arya pulled out her phone. "I'll pay you triple your consultant rate, plus a percentage of whatever damages we recover from Marcus for intellectual property theft. And when this is over, when we've taken him down, I'll help you get proper credit for the ether dome design. Patents, licensing, the whole thing." "I don't want patents or licensing," Ethan said flatly. "I want my daughter to grow up somewhere safe, and I want the man who exploited my wife's death to face consequences. That's it. Then help me make that happen." They stared at each other. Arya with her barely controlled desperation, Ethan with his carefully maintained distance from complicated situations. The ocean crashed below them, constant and indifferent to human drama. 8 hours, Ethan said finally. "I'll have everything you need by 5 p.m. But Miss Langford, when you use my research to take Marcus down, make sure it sticks. Because if he walks away from this, he's going to come after everyone who helped you. And next time, it won't be a guardrail. It'll be something worse." "It'll stick," Arya promised. "I'll make sure of it." Ethan nodded once, then headed back toward his truck. Arya watched him go, this man who'd lost his wife and his life's work to her husband's cruelty, and felt fury crystallize into something sharp and cold and useful. Marcus had made a mistake. He'd built his entire takeover strategy on stolen innovation, assuming no one would ever trace the ether dome back to its real creator. But he hadn't counted on that creator showing up at the exact estate where Arya was hiding, hadn't counted on a chance meeting and a windstorm and papers catching mid-flight. Sometimes desperation made people careless, and Marcus, for all his tactical brilliance, had gotten careless exactly when Arya needed him to. Her phone buzzed. Email from David Park with the subject line, "Everything I could find. Please don't get me fired." Arya opened the attachment and started scrolling through Marcus's presentation to Hendricks Group. Design schematics, stress calculations, prototype testing results, all of it labeled with Marcus's name and the Langford Industries logo. And on page 15, a single line of text that Marcus had apparently forgotten to edit. Original concept development by E. Cole, structural engineering consultant. She almost laughed. He'd been so confident, so sure that no one would ever connect the dots, that he'd left evidence of his theft right there in the documentation he was using to steal her company. Ethan was right. Desperate people made mistakes, and Arya was about to make sure Marcus paid for every single one of his. By 4 p.m., Arya had consumed enough coffee to fuel a small aircraft and developed a migraine that felt like her skull was trying to escape her body. She'd spent the last 8 hours cross-referencing David Park's leaked documents with the financial evidence Cameron had compiled, building a narrative that painted Marcus not just as a thief, but as a systematic predator who'd been exploiting vulnerable people for years. The pattern was there once she knew what to look for. Small engineering firms that had contracted with Langford Industries, only to have their innovations quietly absorbed into company patents with no credit or compensation. Junior researchers whose groundbreaking work somehow became Marcus's brilliant insights. Even a coastal architecture collective that had pitched a revolutionary marina design 18 months ago, a design that bore suspicious similarities to the waterfront development Marcus was now claiming as his own vision. He'd been doing this for years, building an empire on stolen innovation and other people's desperation. And somehow, Arya had missed it. She'd been so focused on quarterly earnings and market expansion that she'd never looked closely at where Marcus's supposedly brilliant ideas actually came from. Her phone rang. "Ethan, I'm pulling up to the estate now," he said. "Got everything you need." Arya met him at the main house. He looked exhausted, carrying a weathered briefcase that had seen better decades and a laptop bag that was mostly duct tape and determination. When he set them down on the dining table, dust puffed up from the briefcase like it had been buried in a time capsule. "This is 4 years of my life," Ethan said, opening the briefcase carefully. "My master's thesis, the original Ether Dome concept sketches, all the engineering calculations, lab testing results from the prototypes I built. Everything Marcus stole and repackaged as his own genius." Arya pulled the first folder toward her. The designs were beautiful, elegant structural systems that looked more like art than engineering. And right there on the title page, Ethan James Cole, Master of Structural Engineering, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. "MIT," she said. "You went to MIT." "Full scholarship, finished top of my class." Ethan's voice was flat, matter of fact. "Then I spent my service years applying those concepts in actual disaster zones, learning what works when buildings get bombed or earthquakes hit or hurricanes tear through coastal infrastructure. The Ether Dome wasn't just theoretical, it was practical engineering informed by real-world failure analysis." Arya flipped through the pages. Stress calculations, wind load tables, material specifications, prototype photographs. It was comprehensive, professional, and completely damning to Marcus's claims of authorship. "This is incredible," she said quietly. "Ethan, this isn't just evidence of theft. This is proof that Marcus has been committing fraud on a scale that could destroy him completely." "Good." Ethan pulled out his laptop, opened a folder containing scanned documents. "I've organized everything chronologically. Here's the original thesis submission from 4 years ago with MIT's official timestamp. Here's the licensing agreement Marcus and I signed, with his signature acknowledging that I'm the original designer. Here's email correspondence where he explicitly refers to it as Cole's Ether Dome project. And here," he clicked through to another folder. "Here's the patent application Marcus filed 6 months ago, listing himself as the sole inventor with no mention of my name anywhere." Arya felt a fierce satisfaction burning through her exhaustion. He really thought he'd get away with this. "He probably would have if you hadn't ended up at this specific estate and I hadn't been hired to assess that specific pavilion." Ethan's mouth twisted. "Coincidence, bad luck, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, under normal circumstances, Marcus would have stolen the Ether Dome, used it to take over your company, and I never would have known until I saw his face on a magazine cover being celebrated as an innovative genius. That's not going to happen." "No, it's not." Ethan closed the laptop. "But you need to understand something, Ms. Langford. When you present this evidence tomorrow, you're not just proving Marcus is a thief. You're destroying his entire professional identity. Every award he's received, every speaking engagement he's done, every innovation he's claimed credit for, all of it becomes suspect. He's going to fight back hard. Let him fight. I've got documentation." "Documentation of the Ether Dome theft, yes. But what about all the other projects he's stolen? Because I guarantee I'm not the only victim. And the moment you expose him, every person who's ever worked with Marcus is going to start asking questions about whether their ideas ended up in his portfolio without credit." Arya hadn't considered that. But Ethan was right. If Marcus had stolen the Ether Dome, he'd almost certainly stolen other innovations too. The Coastal Architecture Collective, the small engineering firms, the junior researchers, all of them represented potential legal exposure, potential criminal charges beyond just the corporate embezzlement and attempted murder. "How do I use that?" she asked. "How do I make the board see the pattern without getting lost in complexity?" "You tell a story." Ethan leaned against the dining table, arms crossed. "Start with the financial evidence. Prove Marcus has been embezzling money through shell corporations and fake consulting fees. Establish that he's been stealing from the company. Then pivot to intellectual property theft. Show them the Ether Dome documentation. Prove he's been stealing innovations and claiming credit. Make it clear this isn't just about money, it's about a systematic pattern of exploitation and fraud. And then, only if you need to, mention the guardrail sabotage." Why save that for last? Because attempted murder is dramatic. It's the kind of accusation that makes people either believe you completely or dismiss you as hysterical. If you lead with it, you risk losing credibility. But if you've already proven Marcus is an embezzler and a fraud, and then you add, oh, and by the way, he also tried to kill someone, that's when it becomes impossible to ignore. Arya nodded slowly. It was solid strategy. Build the case methodically, make each revelation worse than the last. Force the board to see Marcus clearly before he could deploy his usual charm and manipulation. I'll need you there tomorrow, she said, at the board meeting, to present the ether dome evidence and verify the engineering documentation. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then, you're asking me to testify against Marcus directly. I'm asking you to tell the truth about your own work. In a room full of corporate executives and lawyers who are going to tear apart every word I say, looking for inconsistencies or reasons to discredit my testimony. He shook his head. Miss Langford, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I've got a daughter to protect. Walking into that boardroom tomorrow puts a target on both of us. The target's already there, Arya said flatly. The moment Marcus realized I had evidence against him, the moment he sabotaged that guardrail, he made this a fight that doesn't end until one of us is destroyed. And if I go down, he's going to come after everyone who helped me. You think he's going to let you just walk away after I present your engineering documentation? He'll know where it came from. He'll know you're the one who gave me the ammunition to destroy him. Ethan's jaw tightened. So you're saying I'm already involved whether I want to be or not? I'm saying that the only way either of us gets out of this safely is if we go all in. Half measures just give Marcus room to maneuver, to discredit and destroy us piecemeal. Arya moved closer. But if we walk into that boardroom tomorrow together, if we present a united front with documentation that's impossible to refute, we can end this. We can take him down so completely that he doesn't have the power to retaliate. You're assuming the board will side with you. I'm counting on them to side with evidence, and we've got evidence that proves Marcus is a criminal. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. She could see him calculating risks, weighing his daughter's safety against the danger of staying silent. Finally, he nodded. I'll be there. 9 a.m., your downtown office. But Ms. Langford, if this goes wrong, if Marcus walks away with enough power to come after my daughter, I'm disappearing. New state, new identity, whatever it takes to keep her safe. You understand that? It won't come to that. You don't know that. No, Arya admitted. I don't. But I do know that letting Marcus win guarantees both of us spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders. At least this way we're fighting back. Ethan gathered his briefcase and laptop bag. I'll see you tomorrow, Ms. Langford. Try to get some sleep tonight. You're going to need it. He left. Arya stood alone in her grandmother's dining room, surrounded by documents that proved her husband was a monster, and felt something settle in her chest. Determination, maybe. Or just acceptance that there was no turning back now. Her phone buzzed. Rebecca. Marcus just called a press conference for tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. He's planning to make a public statement before the board meeting. This is bad, Arya. He's controlling the narrative. Of course he was. Marcus never went into a fight without stacking the deck first. A press conference would let him present himself as the victim of a vindictive wife's corporate power play, set the tone before Arya even walked into the boardroom. She typed back, "Let him have his press conference. I'll have mine right after." Rebecca's response came immediately. "Are you sure? Media can be unpredictable. If they sense weakness, they won't. I've got evidence that will end him. Just make sure our communications team is ready to distribute documentation the moment I give the signal." Arya set the phone down and stared at the ether dome design spread across the table. Ethan had created something beautiful, something that could have saved lives and revolutionized coastal infrastructure. And Marcus had stolen it, repackaged it, and planned to use it as a weapon to destroy the only thing standing between him and complete control of Langford Industries. But he'd made a mistake. He'd left breadcrumbs. The licensing agreement, the email correspondence, the single line of attribution he'd forgotten to scrub from his presentation. And those breadcrumbs were going to lead straight back to him. Arya spent the rest of the evening preparing her presentation. She organized the financial evidence first, the offshore accounts, the shell corporations, the fake consulting fees. Then the intellectual property theft, with Ethan's original Etherdome documentation presented in parallel with Marcus's fraudulent patent application. And finally, the guardrail sabotage report from Ethan, with photographs and metallurgical analysis that proved deliberate tampering. It was damning, it was comprehensive, and it was going to destroy Marcus completely. At 11 p.m., her phone rang again. Unknown number. Arya almost ignored it, but something made her answer. Arya. Marcus's voice was smooth, calm. I know it's late, but I wanted to reach out one last time before tomorrow. Give you a chance to reconsider this path you're on. Reconsider? You mean surrender? I mean recognize reality. His tone shifted, went softer. Look, I know you're angry. I know you feel betrayed. But this doesn't have to end in mutual destruction. You could walk away from the company, take a generous severance, start fresh somewhere else. No legal battles, no public humiliation, no dragging our private life through the media. You sabotaged a guardrail and put Cameron in the hospital. Silence on the other end. Then, that was an unfortunate accident, infrastructure failure. Nothing to do with me. Ethan Cole's structural assessment says otherwise. More silence, longer this time. When Marcus spoke again, his voice had lost all pretense of warmth. Ethan Cole, the coastal building inspector you hired. Interesting choice, bringing him into this. He's a structural engineer with expertise in sabotage assessment, and he's prepared to testify that the guardrail was deliberately cut. Prepared to testify, Marcus repeated. Based on what? Some photographs and his professional opinion? Arya, you're smarter than this. You know testimony from a hired consultant isn't going to stand up against actual forensic analysis from law enforcement. Then I guess it's good that I've already filed a police report requesting that exact forensic analysis. She heard Marcus take a breath, controlled and measured. You're making a mistake. Escalating this into criminal accusations just makes you look desperate. I'm not the desperate one, Marcus. You're the one who's been stealing innovations for years and calling them your own. The Etherdome, for instance, beautiful design, revolutionary engineering. Except it's not yours, is it? It's Ethan Cole's master's thesis from MIT, which means every presentation you've given to investors, every patent application you've filed, every claim you've made about being an innovative genius, all of it is fraud. The silence this time felt different, heavier, dangerous. You've been talking to Cole, Marcus said finally. He's been filling your head with his version of events. Let me guess. He told you I stole his design, that I exploited him during some tragic personal crisis. Very emotional, very compelling, also completely unprovable. I've seen the original documentation. His thesis, his calculations, his prototype testing. I've seen the licensing agreement you signed acknowledging him as the original designer. And I've seen the emails where you explicitly call it Cole's Etherdome project. Emails can be faked, documentation can be fabricated, and a vindictive ex-consultant with a grudge is not a credible witness. Marcus's voice went cold. But you know what is credible? A pattern of erratic behavior from a CEO who's been under increasing stress. Missing board meetings, hiding at her grandmother's estate, making wild accusations about attempted murder and intellectual property theft. That's the narrative I'm presenting tomorrow morning, Arya. And by the time I'm done, the board is going to see you as a liability that needs to be removed for the good of the company. Try it. I've got evidence that says otherwise. Evidence you obtained through what process? Corporate espionage? Illegal access to confidential files? Because that's what it looks like, Arya. You stole internal documents during a hostile takeover attempt. That makes you the criminal, not me. Arya felt ice slide down her spine. He was right. Some of the documentation she had, particularly the files David Park had leaked from Hendricks Group, could be construed as illegally obtained. If Marcus's lawyers argued that the evidence was inadmissible due to improper acquisition methods. I see you're thinking about it, Marcus continued. Good, because here's how tomorrow plays out. I present my case for why Langford Industries needs new leadership. I show the board my vision for the company's future, including the Etherdome project that's going to revolutionize coastal development. I demonstrate that I have the support of major investors and the strategic planning necessary to move the company forward. And then you show up with your stolen documents and your conspiracy theories and your hired consultant, and the board sees exactly what I've been telling them for months, that you're not fit to lead. The board will see financial fraud. They'll see intellectual property theft. They'll see attempted murder. They'll see a desperate woman trying to destroy her husband because she can't accept that he's better at this than she is. Marcus's voice was almost gentle now, which somehow made it worse. Arya, I loved you once. I really did. But you were never ruthless enough for this world. You wanted to believe in partnerships and fairness and playing by the rules, and while you were building your ethical empire, I was building real power. Tomorrow, that power wins, and you lose. He hung up. Arya sat there, phone pressed to her ear long after the line went dead, and felt the full weight of what Marcus had just revealed. He wasn't just planning to take her company. He was planning to destroy her credibility so thoroughly that even her evidence wouldn't matter. He was going to paint her as unstable, criminal, vindictive. And he had the resources and the connections to make that narrative stick. Unless she hit him first, hit him so hard and so publicly that he couldn't recover. Arya pulled up her contacts, found Rebecca's number. I need you to arrange something, she said when Rebecca answered. Tomorrow morning, 7:30 a.m., before Marcus's press conference. I want every major media outlet in the city assembled at our downtown office. Tell them I'm making a statement about corporate fraud and criminal activity at Langford Industries. Arya, are you sure? If you go public before the board meeting, I'm not giving Marcus the chance to control the narrative. Tomorrow morning, I'm burning his world down before he can burn mine. What about the evidence? If you reveal everything publicly, you lose the element of surprise in the board meeting. I don't need surprise. I need everyone to see exactly what Marcus is before he has a chance to spin it. Arya looked at the ether dome designs again. Marcus thinks I'm not ruthless enough for this fight. Tomorrow, I'm going to show him exactly how wrong he is. She ended the call and spent the next hour drafting a statement that would detonate Marcus's entire life. The embezzlement, the intellectual property theft, the sabotage. All of it laid out in clear, damning language with supporting documentation attached. By the time she finished, it was past midnight. Arya should have slept, but sleep felt impossible. Instead, she stood at her grandmother's study window, looking out at the coastal darkness, and thought about all the ways tomorrow could go catastrophically wrong. Marcus was right about one thing. She'd never been ruthless enough. She'd built Langford Industries with ethics and strategy and careful planning, believing that success earned through integrity meant more than success stolen through exploitation. And Marcus had taken advantage of that belief, had used her principles as a weapon against her. But he'd also underestimated her capacity to adapt. Because when someone pushes you far enough, when they threaten everything you've built and everyone you care about, ethics become flexible and ruthlessness becomes survival. Tomorrow, Marcus was going to learn that lesson the hard way. Tip. Arya arrived at the Langford Industries downtown office at 6:45 a.m., running on 3 hours of sleep and enough adrenaline to power a small city. Rebecca was already there, looking only slightly less exhausted, with a team of assistants setting up a press area in the main conference room. Media's assembling now, Rebecca said, handing Arya a coffee that smelled like burned ambition. We've got representation from every major outlet, financial press, local news, even some national coverage. Whatever you're planning to say, it's going to reach a lot of people. Good. Arya took the coffee, didn't drink it. Where's Ethan? Waiting in your office. He brought his daughter, said he couldn't leave her alone this morning. Arya felt a stab of guilt. She dragged Ethan into this fight, put him and his daughter at risk, all because she needed his evidence to destroy Marcus. But there was no backing out now. They were committed. She found Ethan in her office, sitting with a little girl who had his pale green eyes and her mother's dark curls. The girl was reading a book that looked too advanced for 7 years old, completely absorbed. Sophia, Ethan said quietly, this is Ms. Langford. She's the one I'm helping today. Sophia looked up, studied Arya with the serious expression of a child who'd learned early that the world wasn't always safe. Daddy says you're fighting a bad man who steals things. I am, Arya said carefully, and your daddy is helping me prove it. Is it dangerous? The question was so direct it hurt. Arya glanced at Ethan, saw his jaw tighten. It might be, Arya admitted, but we're being very careful. And when it's over, the bad man won't be able to hurt anyone anymore. Sophia considered this. Then, okay, but if it gets too dangerous, Daddy has to leave. He promised me we'd go to the beach this afternoon, and I'm holding him to it. Despite everything, Arya almost smiled. That's a good promise? I'll make sure he keeps it. Ethan stood. Sophia, I need you to stay in here with Ms. Rebecca while I'm in the press conference. No leaving this office, no matter what. Understand? I understand. Sophia went back to her book like the conversation was already forgotten. Ethan followed Arya into the hallway. If this goes wrong, it won't. If it does, he continued firmly, I'm taking Sophia and disappearing, today, before Marcus has a chance to retaliate. I know, and I won't stop you. Arya met his eyes. But Ethan? Thank you for doing this despite the risk. It matters. Just make it count, he said quietly, because if I'm putting my daughter in danger, it better be for something that sticks. At 7:25, Arya stood behind the podium in the conference room, looking out at assembled reporters with cameras and microphones and the hungry expressions of people who sensed a major story. Ethan was standing off to the side, his briefcase and laptop ready, his expression carefully neutral. Rebecca gave her a nod. The cameras went live. Good morning, Arya said. Her voice was steady, controlled. My name is Arya Langford, CEO of Langford Industries. I'm here today to present evidence of systematic fraud, embezzlement, and intellectual property theft that has been occurring within my company for the past 18 months. The person responsible for these crimes is Marcus Langford, my husband, and the man currently attempting a hostile takeover of this company. The reporters leaned forward. Cameras zoomed in. Arya pulled up the first slide on the screen behind her. Offshore account statements, wire transfers, Shell Corporation documentation. Marcus Langford has been stealing from Langford Industries through fake consulting contracts and fraudulent expense reports. Over the last 18 months, he has siphoned approximately $12 million into offshore accounts controlled by shell corporations that exist only on paper. I have documentation proving every transfer, every fraudulent invoice, every illegal transaction. She clicked through the evidence, methodical and damning. The reporters were taking notes frantically, and she could see understanding dawning on their faces. This wasn't just corporate drama. This was criminal fraud on a massive scale. But the financial crimes are only part of the story, Arya continued. Marcus has also been engaged in intellectual property theft, stealing innovations from engineers and researchers and claiming credit for their work. The most egregious example is the Etherdome project, a revolutionary coastal infrastructure design that Marcus has been presenting as his own brilliant innovation. In reality, the Etherdome was created by structural engineer Ethan Cole as his master's thesis at MIT 4 years ago. She gestured to Ethan. He stepped forward, placed his documentation on the display table. Mr. Cole is here today to present the original research that proves he is the actual creator of the Etherdome design. Marcus Langford stole this work, filed fraudulent patents, and has been using it as the centerpiece of his takeover strategy. He has committed intellectual property fraud on a scale that could result in criminal charges. Ethan pulled up his thesis documentation on his laptop, projected it on the screen. The original designs, the MIT timestamp, the licensing agreement with Marcus's signature acknowledging Cole as the original designer. It was irrefutable. Additionally, Arya said, her voice going harder, I have evidence suggesting Marcus may have been involved in sabotaging infrastructure to prevent evidence of his crimes from reaching me. 3 nights ago, my associate Cameron Hayes was in a serious car accident on Highway 47 when a guardrail failed. He was carrying documentation of Marcus's financial fraud at the time. A structural assessment conducted by Mr. Cole indicates that the guardrail was deliberately cut, not damaged by weather or normal wear. I have filed a police report requesting forensic investigation into potential attempted murder and evidence tampering. The room erupted, reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing, the controlled chaos of a story that had just gone from interesting to explosive. Arya held up a hand. I am providing copies of all documentation to law enforcement and to this assembly. The evidence speaks for itself. Marcus Langford is not a visionary CEO being undermined by a vindictive wife. He is a criminal who has been systematically exploiting people for years, and today is the day that ends. She stepped back from the podium. Rebecca moved forward to handle the follow-up questions while Arya slipped out the side door with Ethan close behind. That went public fast, Ethan said. No walking it back now. Good. Let Marcus try to spin his way out of evidence that's already in the hands of every major media outlet in the city. Arya checked her phone. Multiple missed calls from Marcus. 17 text messages, each one more furious than the last. The final message was simple. You just made the biggest mistake of your life. Arya showed it to Ethan. He's scared. People don't threaten when they're confident. Or he's dangerous. People don't threaten when they're thinking clearly either. They made their way back to Arya's office. Sophia was still reading, completely unfazed by the drama happening around her. Rebecca burst in moments later, laptop open, expression somewhere between terrified and exhilarated. It's everywhere, she said. Every outlet is running your press conference. Social media is exploding, and Marcus just canceled his 8 a.m. statement. His PR team is in full damage control mode. What about the board? Emergency meeting still on for 9 a.m., but the dynamic has completely shifted. Half the board members are calling for Marcus to step down immediately. The Hendricks Group just released a statement saying they're withdrawing support for the takeover pending investigation of the fraud allegations. Arya felt something loosen in her chest. Relief, maybe, or just exhaustion finally catching up with adrenaline. So we won. We bought time, Rebecca corrected. Marcus still has allies, and he's not going to just accept defeat. But yes, you've significantly damaged his position. Arya's phone rang. Unknown number again. She answered. That was quite a performance. Marcus's voice was ice. Public accusations of fraud and attempted murder, dramatic documentation, a tragic engineer with his sob story. Very compelling theater. It's not theater. It's evidence. Evidence that you obtained illegally and presented in a deliberate attempt to destroy my reputation before I could defend myself. That's defamation, Arya, and I'm going to sue you for everything you have left. Sue me. I've got truth on my side, and truth is an absolute defense against defamation. We'll see. Marcus's voice went quiet, dangerous. But understand something. You just declared war, and war doesn't end when you win one battle. It ends when one side is completely destroyed. You made your choice this morning. Now you get to live with the consequences. The line went dead. Arya set her phone down carefully. Ethan was watching her, his expression unreadable. He's going to come after all of us, Ethan said. You know that, right? This isn't over. I know. Arya looked at Sophia, still reading peacefully in the corner. Take your daughter to the beach. Keep that promise. I'll handle the board meeting. You sure? I've got everything I need. The evidence is public now, and the board knows it. Marcus's power is broken. She managed a tired smile. Go be with your daughter. You've done enough. Ethan hesitated, then nodded. He gathered Sophia, collected his briefcase and laptop, and headed for the door. At the threshold, he paused. Miss Langford, for what it's worth, you were ruthless enough. Today proved that. Then he was gone, taking his daughter to the beach, while Arya prepared to walk into a boardroom and finish destroying the man she'd once loved enough to marry. The ocean kept moving somewhere beyond the city, waves hitting rocks, constant and indifferent. And in 90 minutes, Arya would know whether she'd saved her company or just traded one kind of destruction for another. The boardroom felt smaller than Arya remembered. Same mahogany table her grandmother had commissioned 30 years ago. Same leather chairs that probably cost more than most people's cars. Same floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor. But somehow, walking in at 8:55 with Rebecca beside her and a folder of evidence that could end careers, the room felt like it was closing in. 7 board members were already seated. Marcus wasn't there yet, which was its own kind of power play. Make them wait. Make Arya sit in the tension. Remind everyone who really controlled the room. Richard Hendricks, the Hendricks Group CEO, who'd thrown his support behind Marcus just yesterday, was studying his phone with the expression of a man who'd bet on the wrong horse and knew it. Beside him, Margaret Chen from the pension fund board looked like she'd aged 5 years overnight. The other board members, 2 legacy investors from her grandmother's era, the CFO, and 2 independent directors, were avoiding eye contact with everyone. Ms. Langford. Richard set his phone down carefully. That was quite a press conference this morning. It was necessary. Arya took her seat at the head of the table, the CEO's chair. Marcus would hate that. Good. The board deserved to know the extent of the fraud that's been occurring within this company. Alleged fraud, said Gerald Morrison, one of Marcus's golf buddies, who'd somehow ended up with a board seat 3 years ago. You made some very serious accusations, but accusations aren't convictions. No, but documentation is evidence, and I have comprehensive documentation of every claim I made this morning. Arya opened her folder, pulled out the summary sheet she'd prepared. $12 million in embezzled funds, 4 years of intellectual property theft, and credible evidence of infrastructure sabotage that resulted in attempted murder. Would you like to see the details now, or should we wait for Marcus to arrive so he can attempt to explain them? The door opened. Marcus walked in, and Arya felt her breath catch despite herself. He looked perfect. Tailored suit, confident stride, the easy smile of someone who owned every room he entered. But there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Something cold and calculating and absolutely furious. Arya. He said her name like a greeting and a threat simultaneously. I see you've started without me. You're 3 minutes late. We start at 9. My apologies. I was on a call with our attorneys discussing defamation law and the legal consequences of making false public accusations. Marcus took the seat directly across from her, maintaining eye contact the entire time. It's fascinating what you can accomplish with creative editing and strategic omissions. Almost had me convinced for a moment there. Nothing was edited. Everything I presented this morning was verified, time-stamped documentation. Documentation that you obtained through illegal means, corporate espionage during a hostile takeover attempt. That makes it inadmissible in any legitimate proceeding. Marcus leaned back in his chair, completely relaxed. But I suppose when you're desperate enough, legality becomes optional. Richard Hendricks cleared his throat. Marcus, I think we need to address the specific allegations before we discuss procedural concerns. The financial records that Ms. Langford presented are taken completely out of context, Marcus interrupted smoothly. The offshore accounts she's calling embezzlement? Those are legitimate investment vehicles that I established to protect company assets from market volatility. The consulting contracts? Payments to actual consultants who provided valuable strategic guidance. Every transaction she's claiming is fraudulent has a legitimate business justification. Then you won't mind providing documentation of those justifications, Arya said. Consulting contracts with actual work product, meeting notes, deliverables. Anything that proves these payments went to real people doing real work instead of shell corporations that exist only on paper. Marcus's smile didn't waver. Of course. I'll have my team compile everything and submit it for independent audit. Though I have to say, Arya, this sudden interest in financial oversight is ironic given how little attention you've paid to these accounts over the past 18 months. Almost like you didn't care about the details until you needed ammunition for a corporate coup. Margaret Chen spoke up, her voice tight. What about the Ether Dome project? Ms. Langford presented evidence that the design was stolen from Ethan Cole's master's thesis. That's not a matter of context. Either you created it or you didn't. I worked with Ethan Cole on developing his theoretical concepts into practical applications, Marcus said without missing a beat. He had an interesting academic project. I provided the funding, the industry connections, and the business development expertise that turned it into something marketable. The licensing agreement he signed acknowledges that partnership. What Arya is calling theft was actually a collaborative relationship that Cole is now misrepresenting because he's bitter about how the project evolved. That's not what the licensing agreement says, Arya countered. It explicitly acknowledges Cole as the original designer and grants you limited rights to pitch the concept to investors. It doesn't transfer ownership. It doesn't give you the right to file patents under your own name. And it certainly doesn't authorize you to present the work as your own innovation. Licensing agreements are subject to interpretation. My attorneys believe our interpretation is valid. MIT's Intellectual Property Office believes otherwise. I spoke with them this morning. They confirmed that Cole's thesis is registered with the university and protected under standard academic IP protocols. Any commercial use requires proper attribution and compensation, neither of which you've provided. Marcus's expression tightened slightly. the first crack in his perfect composure. You contacted MIT? I contacted everyone relevant to establishing the truth, including the small engineering firms whose innovations ended up in Langford Industries patents with no compensation. The Coastal Architecture Collective, whose marina design bears suspicious similarities to your waterfront development proposal. The junior researchers whose breakthrough work somehow became your brilliant insights. Arya pulled out another document. Would you like me to list them all? Because I've compiled quite a comprehensive record of your systematic intellectual property theft. The room went very quiet. Richard Hendricks was staring at Marcus with an expression that had moved past concern into something approaching horror. Margaret Chen looked like she wanted to be anywhere else. Even Gerald Morrison had stopped defending his golf buddy. You're building a conspiracy theory, Marcus said. His voice was still controlled, but the easy confidence was gone. Connecting unrelated business transactions and collaborative projects into a narrative of fraud because you can't accept that I've been more successful than you at developing innovations. I'm documenting a pattern of exploitation. Arya met his eyes directly. And the pattern is clear. You identify vulnerable people, engineers dealing with personal crises, small firms desperate for capital, researchers looking for industry support, and you exploit their desperation. You offer them help, get them to sign away their rights, and then you take credit for their work while giving them nothing in return. That's business. That's how capitalism works. No, that's theft, and it's about to cost you everything. Marcus stood abruptly. The movement was sharp, aggressive. Several board members flinched. You want to talk about costs? Let's talk about what your little press conference this morning is going to cost this company. Our stock price dropped 6% in the first hour of trading. We've had 3 major clients call to suspend contracts pending investigation of the fraud allegations. 2 key partnerships are on hold. The damage you've done to Langford Industries in pursuit of your personal vendetta is going to take years to recover from. The damage was already there, Arya shot back. I just made it visible. And yes, there will be short-term pain while we clean up the mess you created. But long-term, the company will be stronger without a criminal running operations. A criminal? Marcus laughed, bitter and sharp. You're calling me a criminal while you stand there holding stolen documents and making accusations based on illegal surveillance. The hypocrisy is stunning. The documents weren't stolen. They were provided by whistleblowers concerned about fraud within the company. Whistleblowers you probably paid or coerced into violating their confidentiality agreements. Marcus turned to the board. This is what we're dealing with. A CEO who's willing to break laws, destroy the company's reputation, and make wild accusations about attempted murder. All because she can't handle the fact that her marriage failed and her professional competence is being questioned. My marriage failed because I married a sociopath, Arya said flatly. And my professional competence isn't in question. The board's support for a hostile takeover orchestrated by a fraud is what's in question. Richard Hendricks raised a hand. I think we need to take a step back. Clearly, there are serious allegations that require investigation. I propose we suspend the takeover vote pending an independent audit of all financial transactions and intellectual property claims over the past 4 years. That could take months, Marcus said. Then it takes months. Better than making a decision based on incomplete information. Richard looked around the table. All in favor of suspending the vote? 6 hands went up. Only Gerald Morrison abstained, and even he looked uncomfortable doing it. Marcus's jaw tightened. Fine. Suspend the vote. Conduct your audit. You'll find that every allegation Arya made is either misrepresented or outright false. And when this is over, when she's been exposed as the vindictive, unstable liability she's become, I expect the board to remove her and install leadership that actually prioritizes the company over personal grudges. If the audit clears you, we'll discuss next steps, Richard said carefully. But until then, I'm recommending that both you and Ms. Langford recuse yourselves from operational decisions to avoid any appearance of impropriety. You're suspending us both? Arya felt an anger flare hot in her chest. I'm the one who exposed the fraud. I'm the victim here. You're both parties to a hostile corporate dispute that's now playing out in public media and potentially criminal courts, Richard said. The responsible thing is to step back and let independent parties assess the situation objectively. Marcus smiled. It was a small, satisfied expression that made Arya want to throw something heavy at his head. He'd lost the takeover vote, but he'd achieved something else. He'd dragged her down with him, made her look just as compromised, just as problematic, made the board see both of them as liabilities instead of one clear villain and one clear victim. I can accept that, Marcus said magnanimously. In the interest of corporate stability, I'll step back from operational oversight until the audit is complete. I trust the board will ensure that all investigations are conducted fairly and without bias. Of course, Richard said. He looked relieved, like he'd just navigated a minefield without losing any limbs. We'll bring in external auditors, independent legal counsel, and forensic accountants. Full transparency, comprehensive review, no stone unturned. The meeting continued for another 90 minutes, but Arya barely heard it. They were talking about interim leadership structures and communication strategies and legal liability insurance. All of it felt distant, abstract. She'd walked into this boardroom expecting vindication, expecting the evidence to speak for itself and Marcus to be removed in disgrace. Instead, she'd gotten a draw, a suspension. A promise of investigation that could take months and might not even conclude in her favor if Marcus's lawyers were good enough. When the meeting finally ended, Arya gathered her documents mechanically. Rebecca touched her arm. We knew this was a possibility, Rebecca said quietly. The board being cautious, wanting independent verification. It's not a loss. It's not a win either. It's survival. You're still CEO. Marcus doesn't have the votes for a takeover, and the investigation will prove everything you claimed this morning. Rebecca squeezed her arm. This isn't over, but you're still in the fight. Marcus walked past them on his way to the door. He paused, leaned close enough that only Arya could hear. You should have taken the severance package, he said softly. Would have been cleaner. Now we both lose everything, and the company suffers. I hope your pride was worth it. He left. Arya stood there, hands shaking with suppressed fury, and tried to remember why destroying him had seemed like the only option. Because it was, she reminded herself. Because men like Marcus didn't stop until they were completely broken. Because half measures just gave them room to regroup and attack again. But right now, standing in the boardroom where her grandmother had built an empire that Marcus was systematically destroying, Arya felt less like a victor and more like someone who just realized the war was going to be longer and bloodier than she'd anticipated. Her phone buzzed, text from an unknown number. Parking garage. Level 3. Now. Come alone. Arya showed it to Rebecca. This feels like a trap. Then don't go. But curiosity and exhaustion made her reckless. Arya took the elevator down to level 3, found the area mostly empty except for a handful of cars. She was about to turn back when she saw him. Cameron Hayes, her associate who'd been in the hospital 3 days ago, standing beside a sedan with his arm in a sling and bruises still visible on his face. Cameron, Arya crossed to him quickly. What are you doing here? You should be resting. Needed to talk to you, privately. He glanced around the garage like he expected surveillance. I've been getting threats, phone calls, anonymous emails, all of them saying I need to recant my statement about the documents I was carrying when the accident happened. Marcus is trying to discredit you. It's not just discrediting. The last message said if I testify about what was in that briefcase, I'll have another accident, and this time I won't walk away. Cameron's voice was shaking slightly. Arya, I have a family, 2 kids, a wife who's already terrified because of what happened on Highway 47. I can't be the witness you need me to be if it means putting them in danger. Arya felt her heart sink. Cameron, I understand. I do. But if you back down now, if you recant your statement, Marcus wins. All the evidence I presented this morning becomes questionable because the person who compiled it is suddenly changing their story. I know, but I'm not willing to die for this company, and I'm definitely not willing to risk my family for it. Cameron met her eyes, and she could see the guilt there. I'm sorry. I really am. But I'm withdrawing my statement to the police about the documents. I'm saying I don't remember what was in the briefcase because of the head trauma from the accident. It gives you plausible deniability and gets Marcus off my back. It also makes me look like I fabricated evidence. Maybe. Or maybe it just means the investigation has to rely on documentation instead of witness testimony. He shifted uncomfortably. Look, I'm not saying Marcus didn't do what you're claiming. I believe he did. But I've got kids who need their father alive, and that's more important than corporate justice. He was right. Arya knew he was right. She had no children, no one depending on her survival except employees and board members and abstract stakeholders. Cameron had actual human beings who would be devastated if Marcus's threats turned into action. I understand, she said quietly. Do what you need to do to keep your family safe. I'll figure out another way. Cameron nodded, relief and shame warring on his face. For what it's worth, I hope you destroy him. Just do it without me. He left. Arya stood alone in the parking garage, surrounded by concrete and exhaust fumes and the growing realization that everyone she'd pulled into this fight was systematically being pushed back out. Cameron was recanting. Ethan had taken his daughter and was probably already planning his exit strategy in case things went bad. David Park from Hendrick's group would never testify publicly. He'd lose his job and his career. Even Rebecca, loyal Rebecca, who'd been with Arya since the beginning, would eventually have to choose between staying in this battle and protecting her own professional future. Arya was alone, fighting a war against someone who had resources and ruthlessness and absolutely nothing to lose anymore. Her phone rang. Ethan. Saw the news coverage of the board meeting, he said without preamble. Vote suspended. Both of you recused. That's not the victory you wanted. No, it's not. I'm calling because I need to know if you're planning to continue this fight. Because if you are, I need to make decisions about Sophia's safety. Arya leaned against a concrete pillar. Marcus just threatened Cameron into recanting his statement. My key witness is gone. The board wants months of investigation before making any decisions. And I'm watching everyone I care about get systematically pushed out of this fight because they're smart enough to know when to cut their losses. That's not an answer to my question. I don't know, Arya admitted. This morning I was sure. I had evidence, I had momentum, I had righteous fury. Now I've got a suspended vote and threats against anyone who helps me, and the growing realization that destroying Marcus might cost more than I have left to pay. Ethan was quiet for a moment. You want my professional opinion? Please. Walk away. Take whatever severance they'll give you, sign the non-disclosure agreements, and start over somewhere else. Marcus is willing to hurt people to win this fight. You're not. That's a fundamental tactical disadvantage that strategy can't overcome. So I just let him win? Let him keep the company my grandmother built? Keep the innovations he stole? Keep hurting people? You let him have a hollow victory while you survive to build something else. Something he can't touch. Ethan's voice was gentler now. Arya, I've been in enough war zones to know when a position is defensible and when it's just a place to die. Your position isn't defensible anymore. Not without casualties you're not willing to accept. What about you? The Ether Dome is your work. Don't you want credit for it? I want my daughter to grow up safe. That's all I want. The Ether Dome died with Sarah. Marcus can have the corpse. He paused. I'm taking Sophia and leaving town for a while. Few weeks, maybe a month. Let things settle before we come back. I suggest you consider doing the same. Running. Surviving, Ethan corrected. There's a difference. He hung up. Arya stood there in the parking garage, phone pressed to her ear, and felt the weight of every decision she'd made in the past 72 hours pressing down on her like physical mass. She could walk away, take the severance, sign the papers, disappear to her grandmother's coastal estate, and spend her days watching the ocean. Marcus would win, but she'd survive. No more threats, no more fights, no more watching people she cared about get hurt because she dragged them into her vendetta. Or she could keep fighting, find new witnesses, compile more evidence, wait out the investigation, and trust that truth would eventually win. Risk everything on the possibility that justice actually existed outside of legal theory and wishful thinking. Arya took the elevator back to her office. Rebecca was there looking exhausted and worried. Cameron recanted, Arya said. Just talk to him in the parking garage. He's withdrawing his statement about the documents. Rebecca closed her eyes. Marcus got to him. Threatened his family. Can't blame him for choosing them over corporate warfare. Arya sat down at her desk, the CEO's chair that might not be hers much longer. Ethan's leaving town with his daughter, taking a break until things settle. And I'm guessing David Park is never going to publicly confirm he leaked those Hendricks Group documents. So we've lost our witnesses. We've lost our people, Arya corrected. The witnesses were always just the people I cared about being willing to risk themselves for my fight. And they're not willing anymore. Because they're smart and they have things to lose, and I'm asking them to sacrifice everything for a maybe. Rebecca sat down across from her. What do you want to do? I want to destroy Marcus completely. I want him in prison, bankrupt, humiliated. I want everyone to know what he is and what he's done. Arya's voice cracked. But I don't want anyone else to get hurt for it. And I can't figure out how to have both those things. Maybe you can't. Maybe it's one or the other. Then what do I choose? I can't answer that for you. Rebecca's voice was gentle. But I can tell you that whatever you choose, I'm with you. If you want to keep fighting, I'll help you find new strategies. If you want to walk away, I'll help you negotiate the best exit terms possible. You're not alone in this unless you want to be. Arya looked at Rebecca, loyal, competent Rebecca, who'd been with her through every crisis and victory for 6 years. You should walk away, protect your career. This fight is going to destroy mine regardless of how it ends. No reason to take you down with me. You're not getting rid of me that easily, Rebecca said firmly. I signed on to work for a CEO who actually gave a damn about ethics and innovation. That's still you, even if the board doesn't see it right now. So stop trying to martyr yourself and start thinking strategically about next steps. Despite everything, Arya felt a small smile form. Next steps. Right. Because giving up isn't an option. Is it? Arya thought about her grandmother, who'd built Langford Industries from nothing through 2 recessions and countless corporate battles. Thought about all the women who'd been pushed out of companies they'd built because men like Marcus knew how to exploit compassion and turn ethics into weakness. Thought about Ethan, creating something beautiful and having it stolen during his worst moment. Cameron, terrified for his family. David Park, risking his career to leak truth, all the collateral damage of Marcus's systematic cruelty. No, Arya said finally. Giving up isn't an option, but neither is fighting the same way. Marcus wins conventional battles because he's willing to do things I'm not. So I need to find unconventional approaches. Like what? I don't know yet, but I've got months before the audit completes. Time to think, to strategize, to find Marcus's vulnerabilities and exploit them the same way he's been exploiting everyone else. Arya pulled her laptop toward her. And I've got something Marcus doesn't have anymore. What's that? The moral high ground, the public documentation, the knowledge that he's desperate enough to threaten witnesses and sabotage infrastructure. Arya started typing, pulling up files. Marcus thinks he won today because the board suspended both of us. But what he actually did was confirm everything I accused him of. Because innocent people don't threaten witnesses. Innocent people welcome investigations. Everything he does from this point forward either proves my case or makes him look guilty. Rebecca's expression shifted, understanding dawning. You're going to let him destroy himself. I'm going to create conditions where his only options are ones that reveal what he is. And then I'm going to document everything and hand it to the independent auditors with a timeline that shows systematic witness intimidation and evidence tampering. Arya felt something settle in her chest, not quite hope, but determination. Marcus is good at corporate warfare, but he's terrible at restraint when he's threatened. And right now, he's more threatened than he's ever been. That's dangerous, pushing him when he's desperate. Everything about this is dangerous. At least this way, I'm controlling the pressure, instead of just reacting to his moves. They worked through lunch, building a strategy that was less about direct confrontation and more about systematic documentation. Every threat Marcus made, every witness he intimidated, every move that suggested consciousness of guilt, all of it would be recorded, verified, and added to a growing file that would eventually bury him. It wasn't the clean victory Arya had wanted, but it was a path forward that didn't require sacrificing everyone who'd helped her. At 4 p.m., her phone buzzed. Text from Marcus. I know what you're trying to do, creating a paper trail documenting my responses, building a case for witness intimidation. Very clever. But here's what you're not considering. I can afford to be patient too, and the longer this drags out, the more damage it does to both of us. Eventually, you'll run out of money for lawyers and the board will run out of patience. And when that happens, I'll still be here. Will you? Arya stared at the message. Then she screenshot it, saved it with timestamp and metadata, and added it to her documentation file. He's not wrong, Rebecca said, reading over her shoulder. Extended legal battles are expensive, and the board's patience isn't infinite. I know, but I've got one advantage Marcus doesn't. What's that? I don't need to win the legal battle. I just need to survive long enough for him to make a mistake that's too big to explain away. Arya closed her laptop. And Marcus always makes mistakes when he thinks he's winning. It's his pattern, overconfidence, overreach, the arrogance of someone who's never actually faced consequences. You're betting everything on him screwing up. I'm betting everything on him being exactly who he's always been. The question is whether I can survive long enough to see it happen. Rebecca stood, gathered her things. Then I guess we better make sure you survive, which means you need to eat something other than coffee and stress, get actual sleep, and stop treating this like a sprint when it's clearly a marathon. Yes, Mom. I'm serious, Arya. You look like hell. And if you collapse from exhaustion or make bad decisions because you're running on fumes, Marcus wins by default. Rebecca headed for the door, paused at the threshold. Go back to the coastal estate. Get away from the city for a few days. Let the board conduct their initial investigations without you hovering. Come back when you've got perspective and a plan that doesn't involve self-destruction. She left. Arya sat alone in her office, surrounded by the evidence of 6 years of building something that Marcus was systematically destroying, and tried to figure out if survival really was enough when justice felt impossibly far away. Her phone rang again. Unknown number, but this time she recognized the area code. MIT. Ms. Langford, this is Dr. Patricia Okoye, Director of MIT's Office of Intellectual Property. I received your inquiry this morning regarding Ethan Cole's thesis work. Yes, thank you for calling back. I wanted to let you know that we take intellectual property violations very seriously, especially when they involve our graduate research. After reviewing Mr. Cole's thesis and the documentation you provided regarding Marcus Langford's patent applications, we've initiated our own investigation. If we determine that Langford Industries benefited from stolen MIT research, we'll be pursuing legal action for IP violation and demanding compensation. Arya felt something loosen in her chest. That's excellent. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. These investigations take time, and proving IP theft in court is complicated. But I wanted you to know that you're not fighting alone. MIT protects its researchers, even years after they've graduated. Mr. Cole's work was innovative and important. If someone stole it, we'll make sure there are consequences. The call ended. Arya sat there, phone in hand, and felt the first real hope she'd had since the board meeting. MIT was investigating. That meant independent verification, institutional support, resources Marcus couldn't simply buy off or intimidate. It meant Ethan's work would finally get the protection it deserved, even if Ethan himself had already walked away. And it meant Arya wasn't alone. Not completely. Not yet. She gathered her things, locked her office, and drove north toward the coastal estate as the sun started its descent toward the horizon. The ocean would still be there, constant and indifferent. And maybe, if she was lucky, she'd find some of that constancy for herself. Some way to keep fighting that didn't require destroying everyone she cared about in the process. The coastal estate felt different when Arya arrived just after sunset. Quieter, maybe? Or maybe she was just too exhausted to notice the noise anymore. She parked the Range Rover in the gravel drive and sat there for a moment, listening to the engine tick as it cooled and the distant crash of waves against rocks. 3 months. That's how long the board's investigation had been running. 3 months of depositions and forensic accounting and legal maneuvering that cost more per day than most people made in a year. 3 months of watching Marcus play the victim in carefully staged interviews while his lawyers systematically dismantled every piece of evidence she'd presented. And in those 3 months, Arya had learned something important about fighting monsters. Sometimes you had to stop fighting and let them devour themselves. She climbed out of the car, grabbed the single bag she'd packed, and headed inside. Petra had kept the house maintained despite Arya's irregular visits, and there was fresh coffee in the kitchen and flowers on the dining table that suggested someone still believed this place could feel like home. Arya made it as far as the study before her phone rang. Rebecca. Please tell me you're actually at the coast and not still in the city obsessing over legal briefs, Rebecca said. I'm at the coast, looking at the ocean, being very zen about everything. Liar, you're in the study staring at documents. Arya glanced at the folders spread across her grandmother's desk. I'm allowed to multitask my zen. You're allowed to rest. The independent auditors have everything they need. MIT's IP investigation is progressing. The police finally moved forward with the guardrail sabotage inquiry after 3 witnesses came forward saying Marcus asked them about structural vulnerabilities on that specific section of highway. Rebecca's voice softened. You've done everything you can do. Now you have to wait and trust the process. I'm not good at waiting. I know, but you're also not good at self-care. And if you burn out before the auditors deliver their final report, Marcus wins by default. A pause. How are you really doing? Arya looked out the study window at the darkening sky. I'm tired and angry and scared that all of this was for nothing because legal processes are slow and expensive and Marcus has better lawyers than I do. He doesn't have better lawyers. He has more expensive lawyers. There's a difference. Is there? Because from where I'm sitting, expensive lawyers seem to be winning. They're delaying. That's not the same as winning. Rebecca sighed. Look, I know this is hard, but the evidence is solid. The financial fraud is documented. MIT confirmed that Marcus stole Ethan's work. The guardrail investigation found tool marks consistent with deliberate sabotage. Even if his lawyers managed to exclude some evidence on technicalities, there's enough left to destroy him. Unless the board decides it's easier to settle quietly and make both of us go away. They won't. Not after everything that's gone public. The media coverage, the investor pressure, the employee petitions. There's too much scrutiny now. They have to see this through. Rebecca's voice took on a determined edge. And when they do, when the final report confirms everything you've been saying for 3 months, Marcus is done. Criminal charges, civil liability, professional destruction, all of it. And what do I get? My company back? My reputation restored? 6 years of my life that Marcus systematically poisoned? You get justice and survival and the knowledge that you didn't let a predator win just because fighting back was hard. The words landed heavier than they should have. Arya closed her eyes, felt the exhaustion pressing down. I should let you go. Thanks for checking in. Arya, one more thing. Ethan Cole called the office today, said he tried your cell, but you didn't answer. Arya's pulse kicked up. What did he want? To talk to you. Said it was important. I gave him the estate number. Hope that's okay. Yeah, that's fine. Thanks, Rebecca. She hung up and stared at the phone, wondering why Ethan would be calling now. He'd been gone for 3 months, completely off the grid with Sophia. The last she'd heard, they were somewhere in Oregon, living quiet and staying invisible while the investigation played out. The estate phone rang. Arya picked up. Ethan? Hey. His voice sounded different, lighter, maybe. Sorry to bother you. Rebecca said you were at the coast. I am, taking a break from the legal nightmare. Arya sat down in her grandmother's chair. How are you? How's Sophia? She's good. Really good, actually. We've been in a small town outside Portland. She's made friends, started at a new school. Kid's resilient. He paused. I saw the news coverage about MIT's investigation. They're really going after Marcus for IP theft. Dr. Okoye doesn't mess around. She's treating it like a personal offense that someone stole from one of her graduates. Yeah, she called me last month, flew out to Oregon to interview me personally, get my full statement. Said she's building a case that could result in criminal charges beyond just civil liability. Ethan's voice held something like wonder. I've never had anyone fight that hard for my work before. Strange. Strange good or strange bad? Strange like I forgot institutions could actually protect people instead of just protecting themselves. He cleared his throat. That's actually why I'm calling. Dr. Okoye told me the investigation is wrapping up. Final report due next week. And she said I should reach out to you because there's apparently some complicated legal stuff about who owns the Ether Dome rights now that Marcus's fraudulent patents are being invalidated. Arya's mind shifted into strategic mode. The rights would revert to you as the original creator, but if you signed that licensing agreement with Marcus, the agreement was obtained under false pretenses. Dr. Okoye's legal team thinks they can void it based on fraud and unconscionable terms, which means I get full ownership back. He was quiet for a moment. She also said Langford Industries might have legitimate interest in the technology because the company funded some of the prototype development, even if that funding came through Marcus's fraudulent channels. Are you asking me what I want to do about the Ether Dome? I'm asking if you're interested in actually developing it. The right way this time. Proper attribution, fair compensation, legitimate partnership. Ethan's voice was careful, measured. Because I've spent 3 months thinking about what I want for Sophia's future. And hiding in small towns waiting for Marcus to self-destruct, isn't it? I want her to see her father's work actually mean something, make a difference, save lives the way it was supposed to from the beginning. Arya felt something unfold in her chest. Hope, maybe. Or just the possibility of building something good from all this wreckage. If we did this, if we actually partnered on developing the Ether Dome, it would have to be completely separate from Langford Industries. Clean start, new company, your name on everything. I'd want you involved, your business expertise, your industry connections, just not your husband's company. Ex-husband. The divorce papers went through last month. Congratulations. How do you feel about that? Relieved. Angry it took 6 years to realize what he was, mostly just tired. Arya looked out at the ocean, dark and constant beyond the window. But yeah, if you're serious about developing the Ether Dome, I'm interested. After the investigation concludes, after everything with Marcus is resolved, we could build something real, something that actually helps people instead of just making us rich. We can do both. Revolutionary technology that saves lives and generates revenue. Radical concept. Ethan laughed. It sounded good, genuine. I'll hold you to that. But first, we've got to survive whatever Marcus does when the final report drops, because he's not going to accept defeat quietly. I know, I've been waiting for the other shoe to drop for 3 months. Might not be a shoe, might be an avalanche. Ethan's voice went serious. Watch your back, Arya. Desperate men do desperate things, and Marcus has nothing left to lose except his freedom. They talked for another 20 minutes about logistics and possibilities, and the strange relief of having something to plan for beyond just surviving the next legal motion. When they finally hung up, Arya felt something she hadn't felt in months, actual optimism about the future. It didn't last. The next morning, Arya woke to 17 missed calls and a text from Rebecca that just said, "Turn on the news, now." She found the remote, clicked on the financial channel, and felt her blood go cold. Marcus was holding a press conference, and he wasn't alone. Standing beside him were 3 engineers Arya vaguely recognized from industry conferences, a woman who apparently ran a small coastal architecture firm, and 2 former Langford Industries researchers who'd left the company years ago. All of them looked uncomfortable, but determined. "I want to thank everyone for coming," Marcus was saying, his voice carrying that practiced sincerity that had once fooled her completely. "Over the past 3 months, I've been subjected to a systematic campaign of character assassination orchestrated by my ex-wife. She's made serious allegations about intellectual property theft, financial fraud, even attempted murder. And while I've maintained my innocence throughout, I've chosen to stay silent and trust the legal process." He paused for effect. The cameras zoomed in. "But this morning, I'm breaking that silence. Because I've learned that the independent audit is nearing completion, and I want to ensure the truth comes out before my ex-wife has a chance to spin the findings." Marcus gestured to the people standing with him. "These are the actual engineers and designers who worked on the innovations Arya claims I stole. They're here to tell their stories, to explain how collaborative development actually works in this industry, and to set the record straight about who created what." One of the engineers stepped forward, middle-aged, nervous, reading from prepared notes. "I worked with Marcus Langford on the Ether Dome project." Ethan Cole provided the initial theoretical framework, yes, but the practical engineering, the adaptations that made it commercially viable, that was collaborative work involving at least a dozen people. Marcus was instrumental in coordinating that development. Calling it theft ignores the reality of how innovation happens. Another voice, the woman from the architecture firm. Marcus approached us with a marina design concept 3 years ago. We worked together to refine it. He provided funding and industry connections. We provided design expertise. It was a partnership. Arya's characterization of it as theft is dishonest and damages legitimate collaborative relationships throughout the industry. Arya's phone rang. Rebecca. Please tell me you're seeing this, Rebecca said. I'm seeing it. He found engineers willing to support his narrative. He paid them, or threatened them, or both. Rebecca's voice was tight with anger. This is witness tampering, Arya, using paid testimony to discredit the investigation findings before they're even public. It's strategy. Marcus knows the final report is dropping soon. He's getting ahead of it, creating reasonable doubt. Arya watched Marcus on screen, all wounded dignity and righteous defense. And it's working. Look at the media coverage. They're eating it up. Complicated truth versus simple villains. Collaborative innovation versus theft accusations. He's making the whole thing look like a business dispute instead of criminal fraud. The auditors aren't going to be swayed by a press conference. No, but the court of public opinion might be. And if Marcus can create enough doubt, he might negotiate a settlement instead of facing criminal charges. On screen, Marcus was wrapping up. I'm calling on the board of Langford Industries to release the full audit findings immediately. Complete transparency. Let everyone see the evidence and make their own judgments. I'm confident that the truth will vindicate me and expose this campaign against me for what it really is. A vindictive woman using corporate resources to punish her ex-husband for leaving a failed marriage. Arya turned off the TV. The silence felt heavy, oppressive. What do we do? Rebecca asked. Nothing. We wait for the audit report, and we trust that documentation beats narrative. Arya didn't feel as confident as she sounded. Marcus can parade all the engineers he wants. The financial fraud is still documented. The stolen IP is still stolen. The guardrail sabotage still happened. Facts don't change because he found people willing to spin them differently. Facts get interpreted, and Marcus just hired the best interpreters money can buy. Then we make sure our interpretation is louder. But the truth was, Arya didn't know how to fight this. Marcus had just shifted the battleground from evidence to narrative, from documentation to public perception, and he was better at narrative than she'd ever be. 2 days later, the final audit report dropped. Arya was in the estate study when Rebecca called, her voice shaking with something between triumph and disbelief. It's everything we needed. The financial forensics confirmed $12.3 million in fraudulent transfers. The IP analysis verified that Marcus filed patents using stolen work from at least 7 different engineers. The timeline analysis shows he systematically exploited vulnerable people during personal crises. Arya, they're recommending criminal prosecution for fraud, embezzlement, and IP theft. It's comprehensive. It's damning. It's over. Arya sat down slowly. What about the engineers from his press conference? Footnoted as conflicted witnesses with potential financial incentive to support defendant's narrative. The auditors interviewed them too and found inconsistencies in their testimony. Marcus probably did pay them. Rebecca's voice cracked. We won. You won. The board is meeting tomorrow to vote on immediate termination and full restitution. Criminal charges are being filed by end of week. Arya, you actually did it. You took down the monster. She should have felt victorious, vindicated. Instead, Arya just felt tired. What about Langford Industries? She asked. The company? The board wants you back. Full reinstatement as CEO, public apology for the suspension, comprehensive operational control. They're scrambling to distance themselves from Marcus and restore investor confidence. Rebecca paused. They're offering you everything you wanted. The company, the reputation, the authority. You want it all back. Do I want it back? The question hung in the air. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. That's something only you can answer, she said finally. But Arya, whatever you decide, make sure it's what you actually want, not what you think you should want, not what your grandmother would have wanted, what you want for your life moving forward. After they hung up, Arya sat in the study for a long time, watching the afternoon light shift across the ocean. The company was hers again. She could walk back into that boardroom, reclaim her office, rebuild everything Marcus had damaged, return to the life she'd been fighting for these past 3 months. But did she want that life anymore? The question felt too big, too complicated. So she did what she always did when clarity felt impossible. She went for a walk along the cliff path. The pavilion was still there, still condemned, still waiting for repairs that might never come. Arya stood at the railing, careful to avoid the sections Ethan had marked as structurally unsound, and looked out at the water. A voice behind her said, "You probably shouldn't be standing there." She turned. Ethan was walking up the path, Sophia beside him holding his hand. Both of them looked sun-touched and healthy, the kind of health that came from 3 months away from corporate warfare. "Ethan, I didn't know you were back." "Got in last night. Sophia wanted to see the ocean before we headed back to the city." He stopped a safe distance from the pavilion, kept his daughter back. "Heard about the audit report. Rebecca called me. Congratulations." "Thank you." "You don't sound happy about it." Arya looked back at the water. "I'm relieved. But happy? I don't know what I'm supposed to feel. I got justice, got my company back, got everything I fought for, and all I can think about is how much it cost to get here." Sophia was collecting shells near the path, carefully examining each one before deciding whether to keep it. Ethan watched her for a moment, then said quietly, "The things worth fighting for usually cost more than we want to pay. That doesn't mean this fight wasn't worth it. What if I don't want the thing I fought for anymore? Then you've learned something important about yourself, and you get to make different choices moving forward." He turned to face her. "Dr. Okoye called me this morning. Said MIT's IP office is officially recognizing me as the sole creator of the Etherdome technology. Marcus's patents are being invalidated, and she wants to know if I'm interested in licensing the technology through MIT's commercial development program." "That's incredible, Ethan. You should do it." "I told her I needed to talk to you first, because you made me an offer 2 days ago about partnering on development, and I want to know if that offer still stands now that you've got your company back." Arya considered. Langford Industries would be the logical home for Etherdome development. The infrastructure, the resources, the industry connections. It made strategic sense, but it also meant staying in the life she'd been living for 6 years. The boardrooms and quarterly reports and constant strategic maneuvering. The life her grandmother had built, and Arya had inherited without ever asking if she actually wanted it. "What if we did something different?" she said slowly. "What if instead of developing the Etherdome through existing corporate structures, we built something new, small, focused, mission-driven, actually about saving lives and improving coastal infrastructure instead of just maximizing profit?" Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You're talking about walking away from Langford Industries." "I'm talking about building something that matters more than my grandmother's legacy, or Marcus's betrayal, or corporate politics." Arya felt certainty settling in her chest. "I spent 6 years fighting to keep something I inherited. What if I spent the next 6 years building something I actually chose?" "That's a hell of a pivot." "Is it? I've learned more about structural engineering and coastal infrastructure in the last 3 months than I learned in 6 years running a corporation. I've learned what I actually care about. Innovation that helps people, partnerships built on trust instead of exploitation, work that means something beyond just revenue growth." She looked at Ethan directly. "You asked me what I want. I want to build something good with someone who actually deserves credit for their brilliance. Is that naive?" "Probably, but naive doesn't mean wrong." Ethan glanced at Sophia, still collecting shells. "I've been thinking about what kind of example I want to set for her, what I want her to learn about how the world works. And hiding from complicated situations isn't it. Neither is letting predators win because fighting back is hard." "So you're saying yes to the partnership?" "I'm saying I'm interested in exploring it, with some conditions." "Name them." "Equal ownership. Your business expertise, my technical knowledge. Shared decision-making. No silent partners, no hidden agendas. Complete transparency." Ethan's voice was firm. "And if it doesn't work, if we can't make it profitable or sustainable, we walk away clean. No burning ourselves out trying to force something that isn't viable." "Deal." Arya held out her hand. Ethan shook it, his grip calloused and warm. Sophia ran over, hands full of shells. "Daddy, look what I found. Can we take them home?" "Sure, sweetheart, but we should probably let Ms. Langford get back to her thinking." "I wasn't thinking, I was deciding. Arya smiled at Sophia. Your dad and I are going to work together, build something important that helps keep people safe during storms. Sophia considered this seriously. Is it dangerous? No more than anything else worth doing. Okay, but make sure Daddy comes home for dinner. He forgets to eat when he's working. I'll make sure, Arya promised. They left, father and daughter walking back down the path toward the parking area. Arya watched them go and felt something shift inside her. Not quite peace, but purpose, direction. The sense that maybe, finally, she was done fighting other people's battles and ready to choose her own. Her phone rang. Board Chairman Richard Hendricks. Ms. Langford, I assume you've seen the audit report. I have. Then you know the board is prepared to reinstate you immediately with full authority and a formal apology for the suspension. We'd like to schedule a press conference for tomorrow, make a public statement about the findings, and your return to leadership. He paused. We're also prepared to increase your compensation package significantly as acknowledgement of the unjust treatment you endured. That's generous, but I need to decline. Silence on the other end. Then, carefully, you're declining the reinstatement? I'm declining to return as CEO. I'll help with the transition, provide strategic guidance during the leadership search, stay on as an advisor if the board wants. But I'm not coming back to run the company day to day. May I ask why? You fought incredibly hard to retain your position. I fought to expose the truth about Marcus and protect the company from his fraud. I succeeded. But that doesn't mean I want to spend the next decade in the same role I've been in since my grandmother died. Arya looked out at the ocean, constant and indifferent. I'm choosing something different, something smaller and more focused. I hope the board understands. Richard was quiet for a long moment. I think your grandmother would be proud of you, not for holding on to what she built, but for being brave enough to build something new. Thank you. That means a lot. They discussed transition logistics, board seats, consulting arrangements. Arya would retain significant equity in Langford Industries, but step back from operational control. Rebecca would be promoted to interim CEO, pending a formal search, and Arya would be free to pursue other ventures without conflict of interest concerns. When she finally hung up, Arya felt lighter than she had in months, maybe years. The coastal wind picked up, cold and salt sharp. She stood at the pavilion railing, the safe section, and thought about everything that had brought her to this moment. The windstorm that scattered papers, the stranger who caught them mid-flight, the slow revelation that her entire marriage had been built on theft and exploitation, the choice to fight back instead of accepting defeat. All of it had hurt. All of it had cost more than she'd wanted to pay. People had been threatened, careers damaged, relationships destroyed. Cameron was still recovering from his accident. David Park had lost his job at Hendricks Group after his whistleblowing was discovered. Even Rebecca would face challenges as interim CEO of a company still recovering from massive fraud exposure. But Marcus was done. Criminal charges filed, assets frozen, professional reputation destroyed beyond recovery. The engineers he'd exploited would get recognition and compensation. The innovations he'd stolen would be returned to their rightful creators. And the pattern of predatory behavior would be documented thoroughly enough that he'd never have the opportunity to hurt anyone else. Justice wasn't clean. It wasn't easy. And it definitely wasn't the triumphant victory Arya had imagined when she first started fighting back. But it was real. And it mattered. Arya's phone buzzed one more time. Text from Ethan. Sophia wants to know if you like pizza. Apparently we're having dinner and you're invited. 6 p.m. Antonio's on Harbor Street. Don't make me tell a 7-year-old that important business partners are too busy for pizza. She smiled, typed back. Tell Sophia I love pizza and I'll be there. Then she walked back to the estate, packed her things, and started making lists. Not corporate strategy lists or legal defense lists. Building plans. Partnership structures. The practical logistics of turning revolutionary engineering into something that could actually save lives during the next hurricane season. 3 weeks later, Arya stood in a small office space overlooking the harbor and watched Ethan install the final piece of equipment in their makeshift laboratory. Sophia was in the corner doing homework and periodically offering commentary on their setup choices. This space is tiny, Arya said. We could afford something bigger. Bigger means more overhead and longer runway to profitability. Small keeps us focused. Ethan connected a cable, checked the monitoring system. Besides, your grandmother probably started in a space this size. There's poetry in that. My grandmother started in a warehouse with 3 employees and a prayer. We've got 4 employees, no prayers, and actual structural engineering expertise. We're already ahead. The employees were Rebecca, who'd declined the interim CEO position at Langford Industries to join their venture as COO, plus 2 junior engineers Ethan had recruited from MYT's graduate program. Small team, big ambitions, zero patience for the kind of corporate politics that had defined Arya's previous 6 years. Dr. Okoye is sending the first round of testing data tomorrow, Ethan said. MIT's been running simulations on the Ether Dome design under Category 5 conditions. If the results hold, we can start approaching coastal cities about pilot installations. And if they don't hold, then we iterate and improve. That's how engineering works. Try, fail, learn. Try better. He glanced at her. You nervous? Terrified. I have no idea how to run a startup focused on coastal infrastructure. My entire career has been corporate strategy and market positioning. Good thing you've got a partner who knows the technical side then. Ethan's expression softened. We'll figure it out. Together. That's the whole point of partnership. Sophia looked up from her homework. Are you two dating? Because Emma at school says when grown-ups work together all the time, they usually start dating. Both Arya and Ethan froze. Then Ethan said carefully, Emma at school sounds like she watches too many romantic comedies. So that's a no? That's a, we're focused on building something important right now, and dating would be complicated. Sophia rolled her eyes with the devastating accuracy of a 7-year-old who'd heard that excuse before. Adults are weird. You like each other. You work well together. You both like pizza. Those are literally the 3 requirements for dating. There are more requirements than that, Arya said, trying not to laugh. Name them. Timing, compatible life goals, shared values, trust. You have all those things. Sophia returned to her homework like the matter was settled. But whatever, when you figure it out, I want to be a flower girl at the wedding. Just putting that out there. Ethan looked at Arya. Arya looked at Ethan. Both of them were clearly trying not to smile. Your daughter is terrifying, Arya said. She gets it from her mother. Sarah was also very direct about things. His voice held affection and grief in equal measure. But she's not wrong about the friendship part. We do work well together. We do. And the trust is there. It is. So maybe, Ethan said carefully, when we've got the company stable and the Ether Dome pilot installations running and our lives are slightly less chaotic, we could consider the possibility of dating as a theoretical option, no pressure. Arya felt warmth spread through her chest. I'd like that. As a theoretical option, to be explored when timing allows. Good, because Sophia's already planning the wedding and I'd hate to disappoint her. They went back to work, setting up equipment and running system checks while Sophia finished her homework and provided occasional commentary on their setup choices. It felt normal, comfortable, like something that could become permanent if they were careful and lucky and willing to do the work. 6 months later, the first Ether Dome pilot installation went live in a small coastal town in North Carolina. The structure was beautiful, elegant tension systems, and adaptive load distribution that looked more like art than engineering. When Hurricane Rachel hit 3 weeks later with Category 4 winds, the Ether Dome held perfectly while conventional structures around it sustained major damage. The media coverage was instant and comprehensive. Revolutionary coastal infrastructure, lives saved, property protected, innovative engineering from a small startup led by the original designer and a CEO who'd walked away from corporate power to build something meaningful. Marcus, meanwhile, was serving the first year of a 7-year sentence for fraud and embezzlement. The attempted murder charges related to the guardrail sabotage hadn't stuck. Insufficient evidence to prove direct involvement, his lawyers claimed, but the financial crimes alone had been enough to destroy him completely. Arya tried not to feel satisfaction about his imprisonment. She mostly succeeded. Mostly. You did it, Rebecca said, sitting across from Arya in their small office while news coverage of the North Carolina installation played on the monitor. Built something good from all that wreckage. We did it, Arya corrected. You, Me, Ethan, our whole team. This wasn't a solo victory. No, but it was your choice that made it possible. Walking away from Langford Industries, choosing to build something new, instead of just reclaiming what was stolen. Rebecca smiled. That took courage I'm not sure I would have had. You walked away too. Left a secure position to join a startup with no guaranteed future. Because you showed me it was possible. That success doesn't have to look like what our parents or mentors defined for us. That we get to choose what matters. The truth was, Arya still didn't know if she'd made the right choice. Some days she missed the resources and reach of Langford Industries. The ability to make decisions that affected thousands of people and millions in revenue. The sense that she was carrying on her grandmother's legacy in the way her grandmother had intended. But other days, most days, she looked at the Ether Dome installations and the lives being saved and the recognition Ethan was finally getting for his brilliant engineering, and she knew this was better. Smaller scale, bigger impact, less power, more purpose. That evening, Arya and Ethan stood on the cliff path at the coastal estate, watching the sun set over water that had seen everything and remembered nothing. The pavilion behind them was finally being repaired, Ethan's company doing the work, properly this time, with full structural reinforcement and safety systems that would last decades. Sophia's still planning our wedding, Ethan said conversationally. She's got a whole binder, color schemes, venue options, a Spotify playlist for the reception. We've been dating for 4 months. I know. I keep telling her to slow down. She keeps telling me that when you know something's right, you don't waste time. He glanced at Arya. She might have a point. Are you proposing? Not yet, but I'm saying I could see myself proposing, eventually, when the timing's right and we're both ready and Sophia's finished her binder. He took Arya's hand. Is that too fast? Too presumptuous? Arya thought about Marcus, who'd proposed after 6 months of dating and 6 years of marriage that were built on lies from the beginning. Thought about how long it had taken her to see what he really was, to understand that charm and confidence weren't the same as character. And then she thought about Ethan, who'd shown her who he was from the first moment, competent, careful, someone who caught falling papers and took care of his daughter and built things meant to last. Who'd been honest about his limitations and his fears and his capacity to walk away when things got too complicated. Who'd chosen to stay anyway, to fight alongside her, to build something good after the fighting was done. It's not too fast, she said, and it's not presumptuous, it's hopeful. And I could use more hope in my life. Good, because Sophia's already designed the invitations, and I think she'd actually cry if we told her we weren't getting married eventually. They stood there as the sun disappeared below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that would be gone in minutes. The ocean kept moving, waves hitting rocks, constant and indifferent to human drama. But standing there with Ethan's hand warm in hers and the sound of Sophia's laughter drifting up from the beach below where she was collecting more shells, Arya felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Purpose. The sense that she'd finally stopped fighting other people's battles and started living her own life. The wind gusted, cold and salt-sharp, carrying the promise of storms to come. But this time, Arya had built something strong enough to weather them. Not a company or a reputation or a legacy she'd inherited, something better. A partnership based on trust, work that actually mattered, the choice to build instead of just defend. And maybe, if Sophia's wedding binder turned out to be prophetic, a future that looked nothing like the one she'd imagined 6 months ago when papers were scattering in the wind and a stranger caught them mid-flight. Sometimes the best things in life came from moments of chaos, from the willingness to let old structures collapse and build something new in their place, from choosing purpose over power and partnership over solitary achievement. Marcus had taught her what exploitation looked like, how predators operated, the cost of trusting someone who viewed relationships as transactions to be optimized. But Ethan had taught her something more important, that not everyone was a predator, that some people actually meant what they said and followed through on their promises, that choosing to trust again after betrayal wasn't naive, it was brave. The pavilion lights came on behind them, warm against the darkening sky. Somewhere in the distance, construction crews were packing up their equipment, satisfied with another day's progress on repairs that would last. Come on, Ethan said, tugging her hand gently. Sophia's probably built 3 more sandcastles by now, and wants us to admire her architectural genius. Does she get the engineering talent from you or from Sarah? Sarah was an artist. The engineering is definitely mine. The stubbornness about wedding planning, though, that's all Sarah. She had very specific ideas about how our wedding should go, and she planned the whole thing in about 2 weeks. His voice held that familiar mix of love and loss. Sophia's just carrying on the family tradition. They walked down to the beach where Sophia was indeed surrounded by elaborate sandcastles, each one carefully engineered with supporting walls and drainage channels that suggested she'd been paying attention to her father's structural lessons. "What do you think?" Sophia asked, gesturing at her creation. "This one's designed to withstand wave action and wind erosion." "It's brilliant," Arya said honestly. "You're going to be an amazing engineer someday. Or an architect, or maybe both. Daddy says I don't have to choose yet." Sophia looked between them. "Did you two talk about the dating thing? Because you're holding hands, which suggests progress." "We talked about it," Ethan confirmed, "and we agree that you're terrifyingly perceptive for a 7-year-old. "I know. Emma says it's my superpower." Sophia returned to her sandcastles, already planning improvements. "Just let me know when you're ready to look at the binder. I've got everything organized by season and budget." Arya and Ethan exchanged glances. Both of them were smiling. The ocean kept moving. The construction crews packed up. The sun finished setting, leaving stars scattered across the darkening sky like promises waiting to be kept. And for the first time in 6 years, Arya Langford felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Not fighting to reclaim something stolen or defending something inherited, just building something new with someone who deserved to be trusted. Justice had been messy and expensive and nowhere near as satisfying as she'd hoped. But survival had turned into something better. Into purpose. Into partnership. Into the possibility of a future built on truth instead of lies. On collaboration instead of exploitation, on choosing each other every day instead of just accepting what inheritance or circumstance provided. Marcus had tried to teach her that ruthlessness was the only way to win, that ethics were weaknesses and compassion was a tactical disadvantage. But standing on a beach with sandcastles and stars and people who actually meant what they said, Arya knew he'd been wrong. Ruthlessness might win battles, but it was kindness that built futures. It was trust that created partnerships worth having. It was the choice to keep building even after everything collapsed that separated people who survived from people who actually lived. The wind gusted one more time, carrying salt and possibility in equal measure. And Arya, who'd spent 3 months destroying a monster and 6 months building something beautiful from the wreckage, felt ready for whatever came next.